SMTN.
How's it going, everybody, and welcome to Shin Megami Tensei Network Link 335. I'm your host, joining you around the virtual table known as Life/this podcast. Spencer Presley here with a very special guest all the way from, virtual Tokyo, upstate Ohio, somewhere in between. I've got very special guests all the way from LionWing Publishing, Bradly. How are you doing today?
Hey, Spencer, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on the cast, and I'm excited to talk about Shin Megami and Tokyo Conception today.
Yes! Words that I haven't said since everyone's least favorite Atlas game, Conception 2, released. Have I been this excited to talk about any form of Conception? It's been many years. It might have been 10 years, actually, but if we talk about Conception at this point, I think I think the Spike Chunsoft sniper lawyers are going to have to... They're going to be like, excuse me, sir. You're spoiling all the fun for Conception 2 that no one has talked about in all this time. But for all the real ones out there, we all know what we were all doing playing Conception 2. All three of us Conception 2 fans.
I feel like Conception's kind of an underrated series.
Conception,
a series?
100%. Well, there is an anime. There's two of them. It's a duology at that point. But yeah, there's merchandise. There's manga. There's an anime. Like, I was a staunch Conception defender, even though I started with 2, but that was one of those series of, like, I was, like, so happy that game got localized just because of how weird it was, and as quickly as it came out, the conversation pretty much died, but, like, the big claim to fame I will still say about that series, a fantastic soundtrack. Really, really good soundtrack.
I liked the game all around, quite frankly. I thought it was a cool little game, and I understand I'm in company with, like, 3 other people saying that. But that brings back good memories.
No, it was a different time. Like back when the only way to get handheld RPGs wasn't the Steam Deck and Switch; it was the PlayStation Vita and 3DS. So, unfortunately, we are not here to talk about the PlayStation Vita or 3DS. Although I say that, but then sometimes things like to come up and get brought up with it. But Bradly, you were nice enough not only to come on this podcast and talk with us about yourself and what LionWing has got going on, but just in case people, they've got their head in a hole, they're coming out of it, they've just gotten out of like cryo freeze or something like that. Who the heck are you? What the heck is LionWing? And what the heck is Tokyo Conception?
Sure, yeah. Who am I? So I formed LionWing back in December of 2017. So I always just say 2018. Though really it was like 2019 because that's when we shipped our first product. I came from the video games localization sector. I was there for a while working as a project manager, producer, editor, a little bit of everything. Did that for a while and, one day woke up and said, I think I could probably do this on my own. I've got enough experience now, but the video games localization sector is a crowded market. So I didn't feel like that was a great business move. So I thought, okay, well, how else can I apply my trade? And I have always loved tabletop games. At that time, I was playing a lot of tabletop games. And I just thought, well, hold on a second. There's a market for localization in the tabletop space. I don't think anyone's doing it. There are a ton of Japanese tabletop games that never see the light of day outside of Japan. Maybe I should do something with that. And that idea sort of snowballed into me getting the idea to form LionWing. So that's what I did. And LionWing started off, we were just localizing kind of small form, indie published card games and board games. And did that for a couple years. And then I guess a few years back, I made the pivot into tabletop RPGs. and haven't looked back since. So it's been a wild ride. I got to work on a lot of really cool projects since 2018, 2019, whatever. And, Tokyo Conception is kind of the culmination of all of our work and the experience that we've acquired through doing all of these previous projects. And I think we've been able to package up that experience and put our all into Tokyo Conception in a way that we really would have only been able to uh, at this point in time. I've been asked before, like, oh, do you wish you would have been able to get to Tokyo Conception earlier, in LionWing's lifespan? And for me, it's like, no, I don't actually. I think Tokyo Conception came along exactly when it needed to, and here we are in 2024. Pre-orders are up, and the game launches later this year. And to track the trajectory of LionWing from like this small little company to where like I would reach out, I would cold email Japanese board game designers trying to pitch this idea, and I had no portfolio at all, to now working with Sega and Atlas and some other big companies that we've got coming down the pike, is just sort of a surreal story arc, but a very cool one nevertheless.
Well, it's extra interesting as well because I feel like LionWing came out at such a good time, not only like really during that first initial big wave of like tabletop games really kind of growing in popularity in a way that we probably haven't even seen since like the 80s or something, but just now getting to the point, like even like me for an example, is like someone who lives smack dab in the middle of the country. I can't go like more than 10 minutes without finding multiple game cafes where people are just doing like tabletop stuff, not even counting like Magic or like other like card games out there, like strictly tabletop RPGs. Like it's so interesting to have seen its growth not only happen, but really not really have that slope or sort of like loss. It's just people have been like, hey, this is a really fun way to like play games together. Like let's see this like happen. And like obviously there are many things that led to it growing in popularity of it so much. But what's extra interesting as well is like you mentioned, there's all of these untranslated or unlocalized games in other like countries and other languages, and it's so funny. It's like, yeah, like localization studios have been around in so many different mediums for so long. It's kind of weird to think about how few are doing it for tabletop RPGs.
It is, and at the same time, not terribly surprising, frankly. Tabletop games are such an interesting. It's an interesting medium to work in when you're talking about translation. I oftentimes say, having worked in both, that translating tabletop games, there's a lot more risk involved than translating or localizing video games. And by that I mean, there's risk involved if you're a localization company or publishing company like we are, in that the profit margins for tabletop games are incredibly lean. So that's probably the reason most people don't try this, because it's generally a really bad idea. It's a bad business move, and I would not necessarily recommend anyone do it. But if you can get past that risk, there's also the risk that tabletop games have that just video games don't, and that is, we don't get to release like a day one patch. So whatever is printed, that's it, mistakes and all. And so the stakes oftentimes feel higher, and especially when you're looking at a game like Tokyo Conception, which we'll get into. It's a thick book. It's 320-ish pages. That's a lot of text. That's a lot of words that you potentially could screw up. There's lots of room for error there, and yet no room for correction. So it's dangerous work in that regard. It's super fulfilling work, especially if you're into the medium. But it presents unique challenges that I don't think a lot of people even think about. And really, I didn't think about, even when I got this thing off the ground, I hadn't thought about all the things that could go wrong. I just thought about all the things that could go right. And maybe that was the headspace that I needed to be in to actually do this. Because like I said, it's probably a generally bad business idea to be a localization company in the tabletop game space. But it's challenging yet rewarding. And you're right. There's a ton of work going back 4 decades that has never seen the light of day in the West. And so it is really neat to be neat. Who says neat? It's really gratifying to play a part in like helping these designers reach the rest of the world. Uh, Tokyo Conception's an old book. This isn't like created from the ground up. This book was originally released in the early 2000s. So to be able to talk with the author and say like, hey, we want to bring this work that I'm sure you were totally done with in your head, in your life. Like this was 2 decades ago, you've moved on. To be able to like revisit some of these things and say, this game that you made gets a new lease on life is a really cool feeling. And it's really neat to, there it is again, neat. Apparently I like that word tonight.
Listen, I don't know if it's too late, but I'm just saying, if you want to like hand me a review copy, I can include a review with the word "neat," and then you can be like, back of the box quote: "SMT Network says certified neat game."
Hey, we can work out something, all right? I'm not above bribing people for good reviews.
Only for quotes, though. There'll be no other funny business. It's just for back of the box quotes.
Yeah, no, I actually feel like you should just write a review of the game, and it's just one sentence, and it says this game is neat. Done. 10 out of 10. But it's very fulfilling to do this work, even though it's very challenging.
So one of the other interesting things is like, Tokyo Conception isn't even like the first SMT related tabletop RPG, which is even more funny. But it's this almost 20-year-old book that's come out for it. Like, ironically, the biggest memory I have with it was I was at some like medium to small sized anime convention, and I saw they actually someone had this box of imported like art books and novels and stuff based on games or anime, and the one in there for Tokyo Conception was there, and the guy who owned it just had a sticker on it that just said Nocturne novel, question mark, because it was like, oh, it's a really big book, there's not a lot of pictures, it's probably like a novel or something for Nocturne, we'll just throw it in there. And looking through it and then like realizing what it was and being like, wow, this is like such a crazy idea, and then realizing that no, there's no way I will ever be able to understand this without it being in my native language at all.
Yeah, we've had a lot of reactions like that. Fans saying like, okay, I've known that it exists and that it's existed for a while, but never in my life did I think I was going to be able to get to play it. And so to be able to bring this game to the West has been a lot of fun for a lot of reasons. But I think part of what makes this work so enjoyable is you put something out like this, like Tokyo Conception, and you hear, you see, you talk to people, and they're like, I did not think that I'd live to see this day. They say it jokingly, but it is really fascinating to know that this series has been around for a long time and no one has ever touched it. And now, mind you, tabletop RPGs have always been niche. They had a huge boom in really in the 80s. But even then, even with the quote boom, it was still niche. And although there's been a huge renaissance that I think rivals or in some cases surpasses the 80s boom of TTRPGs, still pretty niche. Less niche, but still niche. And so on one hand, it's like, yeah, it kind of makes sense that no one's touched this. And on the other hand, it's like SMT has such a dedicated fan base. How did someone not say like, okay, let's just take a shot at this and see if there's a market for it? I'm certainly glad they didn't. And I'm certainly glad that we got to be the ones to bring it to market.
And I mean, it's so funny just because there's like so many different sort of like ways to really jump around with it. I guess actually just to get a little bit more personal history, if you have much to share with it, like outside of your work and with LionWing and even before, just I guess kind of in terms of SMT, Persona, and even Atlas, like what was your kind of history before this in terms of like how much you were familiar with the series?
Yeah, so the first Atlas game I ever played was Persona 2. I remember walking into an electronics boutique, I don't know, later-ish 90s, and I was trading in a game, and I was looking for my next RPG to play. And I remember going over to the wall and I had been playing like back-to-back Squaresoft games. So I was very much so looking for a palate cleanser in terms of setting and story and just even like aesthetic. And I saw Persona 2 sitting on the shelf and I said, it's interesting looking. I flipped it over, looked at the back, and I was like, all right, I'm buying this. And fell in love with the series pretty much within the first 30 minutes of that game because I think Persona 2 has such a strong opening. And I'm so glad that Persona 2 was the game that I started with because I still call it my favorite Persona game. So it started with Persona 2. Um, However, to tie it into Nocturne, I remember pre-ordering Nocturne for PS2. And I also remember there was this time period, and old people like myself will remember that in the later-ish 90s, Electronics Boutique, they were selling import Sega Saturn games.
Yeah.
And I remember going to my local EB in Tri-County Mall in Springdale, Ohio, and seeing a copy of Soul Hackers. And I had already played Persona 2. So at this point, I already knew the Shin Megami name a little bit, not a ton. But I knew enough to know, like, hold on a second. That's from the same franchise. So I remember buying Soul Hackers there from my EB, taking it home and being like, I can't get through this. What the hell did I just do? And then I put that one on the shelf, and I don't think I ever touched it again. But so my connection with the series, I guess, dates back 25-ish years. But even outside of like Megaten and Persona, like Atlas has been part of my four pillars of gaming. My four pillars of gaming being Sega, Capcom, Atlas, Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
So I love SMT. I love Persona, but I actually would say it's not like my favorite Atlas game is like Tactics Ogre Battle, like that.
Ooh.
That's my stuff. Like I love that.
That's the kind of deep cuts we like to hear on this podcast.
Yeah. So we were talking about kind of retro stuff before we jumped on to record, and I had mentioned that I grabbed this random old Xbox game, but like 2 weeks ago I was like, you know what, I want to buy Tactics Ogre: The Night of Lotus for GBA, and that's what I did. And nevertheless, I love Atlas games. I have an affinity for them, and it's been a bit of a surreal ride to be able to work on this property because of what the series has meant to me and how long it's been with me, but also just generally how much I've loved what Atlas has done, their stamp on the industry, and to be able to play a small part and converting that over to the tabletop space for the Western world is a plot twist I never saw coming.
I mean, I mean, even if you had told me 3 years ago that this would be a thing maybe happening, I wouldn't believe you. Because, like, there's a few, especially for someone like me who's been with the series for as many years as I have, followed it, covered it, and aware of like a lot of the things that don't really get brought over here or leave Japan. There have been a handful of things that I'm like, these are never going to come out. There's no way in hell we'll ever see them localized, or in whatever way it might happen. And it's so funny that most, if not all of those, have happened in some way, shape, or form. I remember way, way, way back in the day, all of those cell phone games being like, I'm probably one of like very, very, very few people outside of Japan who played any of those old Atlas developed flip phone games, and to like see Gmode actually not only putting them out now and like putting them on Switch and Steam, and yes, it's only in Japanese and stuff for now, but it's like that at least opens up that barrier of them possibly getting localized, which is such an insane thing to see. Like, we're living in like a world where we've gotten so much like manga and things from Atlas that's not just like the mainstream series and games getting like localized that have been so great to see. And another big one for me growing up was how shocked I was when Bento Books actually started localizing the Avatar Saga books, which I was like, I would have never, ever, ever thought that those would have happened. Joke's on me, we only got 2 out of 5, but I'm still holding out hope. And again, yeah, like the tabletop RPG is another one of like, these are properties that mean a lot to a lot of people and have been stuck in Japan, and it's like, it's not like you can just go up to Atlas USA now and just be like, oh, hey, do you care if we localize this or whatever, of like having to track down like who owns the copyrights to this, like who did the art, who did the original like writing and everything for it, before even thinking about legally how is this a product that we can actually put out in like 2024 is such an insane thought.
And it was an insane journey because all of that stuff you just talked about there, the hurdles you have to overcome in working with an IP as established as SMT, but then also with a book as old as this TTRPG is, as you can imagine, there are tons of complexities, tons of roadblocks, both anticipated and unanticipated. It's why this project has taken 3 years to finally get to market, because it was such a complex deal to put together, and that's not even talking about the contractual elements and the legalities of what this thing looks like in black and white on paper that binds us to this contract. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But what's wild, you were talking about, these properties or these forms of media that you never would have thought would have found their way to the West. In some cases, just 10 years ago. Like the market has changed so much when it comes to localization that things that are coming out now and that are being localized for the West and released in the West may not have even been localized and released in the West a decade ago. So, the advancement of globalization and consumer connectivity is really phenomenal in many regards because it opens up the door for these types of projects and for these possibilities, many of which we never thought were possibilities, or if we did, they certainly were possible. They were possible, but not probable, right? But this is one of those books. The SMT TTRPG series goes back even further than 20 years ago. So this series actually started in '93. Mm-hmm. So we are the Nocturne book that we have subtitled Tokyo Conception is actually the 4th edition of the book. It's the 4th iteration of this system that started in the early to mid 90s. It is wild to me that this series was out there for so long and no one touched it. Even, TTRPGs certainly were dying in the 90s, but they weren't dead like they were in the early 2000s.
For sure.
And so it's interesting that no one even tried anything in the 90s with this property. Though I think when we talk later about, what it was like to put this deal together, I might be able to shed some light on why that maybe didn't happen. But it's still wild to have this thing that is so old and have such a lineage to it, and it's only now making it to the West.
No, and it is even kind of like more funny of this process has felt so long from like a fan's perspective and covering it, and like hearing you mention that it's been 3 years in the making. It's just been like I've been around in this industry enough, kind of knowing from development to even stuff like producing and localizing games for it. Like my brain kind of knows where to start in that process of like realistically. I know various projects and everything kind of change for it, but I mean, like for you guys, was this something that when you started initially, you kind of had an idea of being like, hey, this is going to take this long, or was it one of those things of just being like, wow, I can't believe how long this took to finally get to market?
Yeah, so it was interesting. We had never worked with a company as big as Atlas and by proxy Sega prior to this deal coming together. So I didn't actually have a framework for how long I thought this thing was going to take. I knew it was going to be complicated, but I did not know that it would take a year just to sort out the rights and where they sat. I guess I assumed that this project, because it was complicated, would maybe take 3 or 4 months,
Hmm.
you know, just to get a contract signed. Because up until then, I was signing contracts usually within 4 weeks of like first contact. And of course, that made a lot of sense. These were either, you know, solo devs or small indie circles. But for it to take a little over 12 months just for us to be able to sort out where the rights existed, who had them, who didn't have them. I didn't see that one coming. And then it would be another 2 years of development time after that, which I also didn't see coming. So this book, when it was released in the early 2000s, it was released by a publisher called Jive. Now, Jive was doing a good amount of TTRPGs in the 90s and the early 2000s. But in 2024, the Jive that used to be was pretty much they no longer existed. Jive still exists, but it's a very different company these days. So effectively, not only was I going back into the repository of 20 years, but I was trying to contact people at companies that didn't exist. And even if I could find someone that had a connection to that old company, it wouldn't be the people that I needed to talk to. Because all of the folks at the current iteration of Jive, they didn't even know about this game. They published it and they didn't even know about it. Which you'll see that as I tell some of these stories, that's a through line in a lot of our encounters, because even Atlas didn't know that this game existed. The folks that we talked to, they didn't know it existed necessarily. So we were going back through, and not only was Jive involved, but there were a couple other companies adjacent to Jive that were involved in this that also kind of had their hand in the pot. So we were contacting folks who had retired, folks who had died, folks who had shifted companies, and folks that they had no footprint on the internet whatsoever. And fortunately, my first point of contact wasn't with Atlas, it wasn't with Sega, it wasn't with Jive. I went directly to the game's author, Tokita-san, Tokita Yusuke. And I found him on Twitter and I followed him, and he was very active on Twitter. And so I knew that he was accessible. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, listen, here's who we are. Here's what LionWing is all about. We want to kind of want to do the impossible. And we want to publish the Nocturne TTRPG book that you wrote. I have no idea where to start, so I figured I'd reach out to you first. I have no idea if you're going to read this or even respond to it, but I hope you will. Have a good day.
Please tell me, was this just like a shot in the dark, like DM, no less?
You know what? I'd have to go back. I think no. He has his email.
Oh, okay.
In his Twitter bio, so I cold emailed him, and quite frankly, I thought that my message was going to sit in some inbox that was never looked at, that hadn't been active in 10 years, or he was going to look at it and just kind of like laugh his way onto his next task for the day. And instead, he responded in about 4 hours and was like, I love this idea. You're crazy. I love this idea, but you're also crazy. Do you know where to start? And I was like, nope. And he was like, okay, well, I don't either, but let me start like just pushing buttons and pulling levers, and I'll get back to you in a little while. And so without Tokita-san being such an advocate for this project and wanting this to happen, I mean, the guy is still making TTRPGs, and, you know, he was making TTRPGs in the late 80s. So, you know, let that sink in. This isn't like a young dude. To have him as an advocate and to be so willing to do all of this legwork that I simply would not have been able to do. I would not have been able to get in contact with the people that he was able to get in contact with. This project wouldn't have happened. I mean, he was like tapping into contacts of like old writing buddies, like old writing partners from books that he had co-written, you know, in 1992. That he hadn't talked to, you know, in however many years. And through his efforts, we were actually able to get hold of someone at the current iteration of Jive who was the only remaining employee who had worked at the old Jive, who kind of knew about the project, but more importantly, knew of someone who did know about the project. And from there, things just started taking off. However, that was just the part of the story of how we were able to get in contact with people. That doesn't take into account all of the legal stuff with rights holders, and like Tokita-san owns some of the writing rights. Jive owns some of the publishing rights. Some of Jive's like adjacent partners owned a little bit of the rights. Atlas owned the right, obviously to SMT. Even within the book, the illustrations existed with different people, not necessarily just with Atlas. So it was a complete cluster mess that took us 12 months basically to sort out until we finally figured everything out, got everyone on board, got everyone paid, signed our contract, and were able to start development.
I mean, it's so funny of like people will probably like hear this and be like, "Oh my God, I can't imagine how many hoops that's got to be to like jump through." But it's like so funny of like I feel like as someone who's been into like so many different like niche series and things for me, like I think the go-to Western comparison I always think of for stuff like this is I forget if it was Warren Spector or who was trying to get the rights back to System Shock back before they were going to work on like the new games and the remakes and stuff, because it was like no one knew who owned the rights. We knew who
Yep.
made it, we knew who published it, but because like, and I mean Jive is a great comparison of like Jive, I don't even remember like where they're at currently. Of like, I'm pretty sure they still exist. Like, not much a name, but like I had fallen off, falling from them originally because I remember them publishing, and then I think having to sell off shortly after
Mm-hmm.
fourth edition came out because I think they went to like Popular Publishing or something. But then it's like these names start changing hands, and people either stay or leave and move and go to different places, and especially when things have like so many different like hands in the pie of like, okay, who do we need to contact for this? Because the last thing you want is to have to like pour years of your life and your work into something just for like some guy in Idaho who owns 5/10 of the right to this book because he did like the copyright for a weekend.
Yeah, it reminds me. So all of that is totally accurate, and it reminds me of that Spider-Man meme. When all the Spider-Men are just like pointing to one another,
Yes.
that's what this felt like at many times. But what is really shocking about all of this is, despite how long it took to make this happen and how complicated it was, there was never anyone, not a single person, who we talked to who had or didn't have decision-making power who said, we're not interested. No one said, yeah, I don't think this is a good idea. No one said, yeah, I don't know, we're not going to help. Somehow, it's like the stars aligned, and everyone we talked to, even if they didn't know where to go next, they were like, let me take a few days and figure out who I can maybe get you to that might know someone who might know someone. So you would think that's, I mean, we talked to so many people. You would think that someone would have shut it down. And yet every time that I thought like, oh my God, this is it, this person's going to kill the deal, that person would not kill the deal. They would in fact push it through and want it to get to the next person. And it just kept happening of like miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. And I'm like, holy shit. And by the time that we got to like month 11, then it was like, oh my God, this is going to happen. Like, I can't believe it. This is going to happen. I didn't think this was going to happen, but this is going to happen. And then it happened.
Which has got to be like so heartening and motivating to everyone involved as well. Of like, I feel like a lot of times, especially for a lot of older, less popular or profitable IPs out there, it's really easy for just some either bigwig or like somebody involved at the top to just be like, okay, why are we going to work this hard to maybe make like 1 month of sales for us and license something out with it? So it's nice that like even though it's been so long, there's still so many people passionate about with it. And it's funny, I've been scrolling through um, Tokita's like blog and stuff for it, which has been so funny to like see how active they've been online. Which, by the way, I'll try and link as well in the show notes for it. You were not kidding. They are very active online still, which I would not have guessed.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so. I mean it's also this will come up as well in another question like later on down the line for it as well. But it's like now also that you guys are publicly actually able to talk about it, it's got to feel even more gratifying seeing the reception be as positive and as vocal as it has been for everything.
Yeah, it has been. And just to go back for a second before I talk a little bit more about that
For sure.
uh, aspect, like you are so right. None of like all the companies involved and all the people involved, it's not like anyone was getting a huge payday from this, right? Like to some of these companies, this was like pennies effectively, and yet they were working super hard to make it happen. And I do attribute a lot of that to Takeda-san. He is very well known, extremely well known. I mean, like top 5 most famous tabletop RPG and game book writers of all time in Japan. So like everyone knows Takeda-san. Like everyone. I don't know if the guy's ever met someone who didn't know him. So the only thing that I've ever thought was the reason why these people wanted to, oh my gosh, spend hours of their day trying to figure out, something that wasn't going to give them much in return is they all like Takeda-san, and they all have a lot of respect for him. Not only have I've never met someone who didn't know him, I've never met someone who didn't like him. So I think that has a big, I can't even begin to express how instrumental he was in making this happen. Without him, this project does not happen. That is 100% the truth. But it has been great to see such a reaction from folks. I got to be honest, there's not a precedent for this type of tabletop RPG. There's a lot of IP based tabletop RPGs in the Western market right now. You like turn a corner and you're going to find like a Terminator RPG, an Aliens RPG, an Avatar: The Last Airbender RPG, a Star Trek RPG, a Stargate RPG, a Star Wars RPG. Like you're going to find all these Western properties, right? And that makes a lot of sense. Those things do really well, and the market who would like those IPs, there's a pretty big cross section of folks who like those IPs and also play RPGs. However, when you start drawing the Venn diagram of tabletop RPG players and niche Japanese IP, the overlap isn't terribly huge. And because no one has ever really done a Japanese RPG IP-based tabletop role-playing game for the Western market, I didn't have a whole lot of market data to inform my decision about whether this was going to hit big, hit mildly, or not hit at all.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, being part of the fan base, I know that Megaton fans, we're cut from a different cloth, right? So, like, I knew that there would be some inherent excitement from that community, but I sort of assumed that people would just think like, oh wow, that is really cool that they're doing that. I'm never gonna play an RPG. I don't play it. I don't play tabletop RPGs. Cool that they're doing it. Not gonna play it. And so I was just kind of crossing my fingers that there was an audience big enough to where this project didn't bankrupt me. And then for people to show up, and to show up in a big way, that took me by surprise, but also was extremely validating, because this whole process for the last 3 years, so much time, energy, and resources have gone into this project. And I remember just thinking the whole time, like, I don't know if anyone wants this. I want it. I just hope that other people want it too. And then for a lot of people to want it was validating and like, oh my gosh, okay, all that was worth it. But also really inspiring, like, okay, wow, there is people want this. Let's go with it and let's see what else we can do.
Now, just like kind of lining up like timelines and stuff for it, I've just got to ask out of morbid curiosity, was any part of this motivated, or did the HD re-release of Nocturne have anything to either push, show as extra motivation in terms of like the IP being a little bit more relevant with it? Like, did that game getting re-released have anything either positively neutral or negative like effect on the progress for the tabletop RPG?
No, I mean, coincidence is what that is. I know people would love to hear like there was some grand strategy behind it, but there really wasn't.
I mean, I as a big dumb nerd fan, I appreciate you guys just out of the blue being like, we need to make this come out, versus just being like, oh man, you know what's going to be a great tie-in 4 years later is this tabletop RPG. Like, we're going to be at the point where like we're going to be playing this on a table made out of copies of Nocturne HD, whereas like that's where we're going to be at.
I'll tell you where like the remaster did kind of come into account was why we chose Nocturne as the book to publish and not any of the SMT RPGs that came before it. So we have gotten asked many times in various interviews like this and whatnot of, okay, why did you choose Nocturne? It's the fourth edition of the series. It's not even the most recent edition. It's not the fifth edition. It's the fourth edition. There were three that came before it. Why'd you start here? And the answer to that is people know Nocturne. They're in that remaster played a big part in people knowing Nocturne.
Mm-hmm.
There's the old folks, like me, maybe you too. I don't know your age, but there's the old folks who remember OG Nocturne, and then there's the newer gen who know HD remaster Nocturne. So that game is already out there. People know of it. People have seen it. It's familiar. And so starting with Nocturne made a lot of sense from like a branding perspective, from a marketing perspective, and just for like a visibility perspective, that it's much easier to get people to jump into something like this if they're already kind of familiar with that thing, right?
Yeah.
There's also the fact that first through third edition of this series focused on Shin Megami 1 and 2, and without there ever having been an official English release of those games, that made it a little bit of a harder sell.
I mean, I've just been looking at my iPhone Touch from 2010 with a very legal ROM of SMT1 that's only on iOS and definitely hasn't been delisted. So I don't know what you're talking about. I've got a very, very legal copy of SMT that I play on my best gaming system possible. My iPod Touch from 2010, or God knows when I bought that thing.
Wow, it's a deep cut. An iPod Touch.
I don't know, like whatever ran it, whatever I was allowed to not update for the rest of eternity just to play this GBA port of a Super Nintendo game, because that's the way Atlas truly intended SMT1 to be experienced.
Absolutely, and to that extent, when I was talking with Atlas about this, and I had inquired. Once I knew that Nocturne was going to happen, I started inquiring about the rest of the series, and they basically were like, "Listen, no one outside of Japan knows Shin Megami 1 and 2. No one wants to play. No one's going to want to play those tabletop RPGs based on those games." And I remember saying, to them, like, "Okay, I hear where you're coming from. I think you might be."
Underselling?
Yeah, that wasn't my word. I'm trying to remember my exact word there, but that's effectively what I was saying is I think you might be missing the point here. I think people just want to play they want to play characters in the SMT universe, they don't really care if it's based on one or two or Nocturne or anything else. And that's actually part of why we did change the name of the book for this English release. Um, when it was when this book that we're bringing out was released in Japan in 2003, it was just called Shin Megami Tensei TRPG Nocturne. Uh, we changed that and made it Shin Megami Tensei the role-playing game, and then we gave it the subtitle of Tokyo Conception, with the understanding being, well, we don't want to only say that this is a Nocturne game because people who haven't played Nocturne but know SMT may not want to play this game if they're like, well, I don't want to play the tabletop RPG because I haven't played the video game. But also, it, for branding purposes, it does get more at that. I think people just want to like play in the SMT sandbox, and calling it the Shin Megami Tensei role-playing game, I think is kind of illustrates that point of, hey, people want to play these characters in these worlds with these characters that they know, and that's really all they care about. And I tried to sell Atlas on that, of like, it doesn't matter if it's SMT 1 or 2, like you're missing the point here. And they just were like, yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying, and also we're not doing it. Okay,
I think like a great like a good Western comparison for it, kind of still sticking with that like tabletop RPG thing, and even just adaptations in general. I think of the Witcher series, of like, name another series that is more popular and its third attempt, but still leans into that way more niche, way less popular first two either games or all the other books and things like that for it, which it's like, hey, as long as we put like the version of Geralt that people know on the cover, people are still excited to be a part of that world, even if they don't know or have jumped into the first or second or whatever part of this series.
exactly. That's exactly it. That, I mean, people see the Shin Megami Tensei name, they're going to want to check it out. They don't care which game, which video game it's attached to. Like, that's not what they're interested in.
No, and I mean, I at least always kind of feel with it, especially for something like a role playing game such as Tokyo Conception. I feel like there's really no there's not going to be any less interest if, even for whatever reason, it ends up being like, okay, well, we're going to start with this one and then could do an older one down the line, or maybe do a newer one down the line. Like, the release order wouldn't really matter because those fans still are going to want to compare it. I mean, actually, another great kind of comparison would even be Nocturne itself as a game. There are so many people who, whether they played the original Maniacs version or
Mm.
the Japanese exclusive versions, which had different features and other things with it, like, people are always interested in kind of comparing, contrasting, and going back to something, even if it's an older version or a newer version that no one ever got to experience.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I will say, from the graphic design failure degree nerd that I am inside, I've got to ask, was there any part of you that wanted to at least still use the same type font from SMT's PS2 cover?
Um, do you mean like in the logo design?
Yes, so in the logo design, because the current SMT logo, it's moved and italicized around over the last couple of years. It's basically
Uh,
been this way since Apocalypse on 3DS.
yeah, I'm trying to remember. I remember giving my graphic designer a design doc, and I had the original Nocturne logo in there. I had the remastered logo, and that did play into the logo that we ultimately landed on, to some degree. But then also, like, if you look at our logo, we we don't exactly, like, it says the role playing game there. We don't exactly use a typeface, a
Hmm.
font face that is really in any of the other logos. So it all of the Nocturne logos played into how we came up with ours, but I don't think we really chose one over the other. We just kind of looked at both and said, all right, let's take this and let's kind of like do our own thing with it.
Which, I mean, I completely get it as well with it. And It's been interesting too, especially comparing the fact that you guys have multiple covers and stuff for it. I'm not sure how much you either expected the reaction or were surprised by it. Of like, when I saw all the covers to choose from, it was so funny. Of like my initial thing being like, oh no, I don't have an initial favorite, and the variant collector nerd in me unfortunately wants all of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Doing the variant covers was like that was a late game call. Um, that actually wasn't in the original plans. That was like an 11th hour decision that I made in a vacuum, uh, and was like, all right, this is what we're doing. This we're going to do variant covers, um, primarily because I like variant covers myself. I am a collector nerd, so I like that kind of thing. But I also wanted people to have options, especially because I knew that we were going to do a LionWing edition that was going to be kind of like pre-order exclusive, and it was going to come with certain things. And I just remember thinking like, okay, well, how do I make the pre-order special? Like, what can I offer that people will think is cool, um, that will make them want to pre-order this instead of just waiting for the release? And so, I said, all right, let's do some variant covers. We had all of this really, really awesome high res art that Atlas gave us permission to use for whatever we wanted. And so I was sitting on this art and I was like, well, like I like variant covers. I think we need some cool pre-order incentives, and I'm not into like changing the content of the book or anything for pre-orders. So I looked in and said, you know what, we got all this art. Let's just do this. Let's do some variant cover stuff. I love all the variant covers. The death variant is, of course, well, maybe not of course, but it is my favorite. um, and I will say that according to when I look at the sales data, that one is in the lead for best-selling variant cover, though
Oh.
not too far behind it is the Nocturne variant.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I figured Nocturne variant would be in last place.
Yeah, I actually was not exactly convinced, um, or not exactly sure how that cover was going to perform, because I had this kind of rationale in my mind of like, well, people know that cover. Like it's like overtly Nocturne. I don't know if they'll even find it all that like special because everyone's seen that before, and yet come to find out, people want that cover on their book.
It's it's tough because I think I would almost have like choice paralysis of like, see, if you guys were like really corporately evil, you guys could have done this. And hey, if you want to save it for like a April Fool's variant, terrible idea, I would have been like, okay, obviously the close-up shot of the Demi-Fiend's face is really iconic, and that's a no-brainer for a cover, like taking from that original cover art. The problem is, what color do you pick? Do you go with the gold? Do you go with the original blue? Do you have the silver? Do you have the weird green one that no one remembers from the soundtrack? Like, there's so many weird little like colors that people associate. And I mean, even the same thing of like, do you go with red, but then you already have red with the death variant? So it's like the choice paralysis of which cover to pick would almost be the hardest part for me.
Yeah, so what's funny is that was not hard for me. So I love the blue version of that art. So like I didn't even think about any of the other color variations of the Demi-Fiend's face there. It was just immediate like, yeah, we're doing the blue. But I can certainly understand where someone would be like, oh my gosh, there are a couple different versions of of this cover. What are we going to go with? And there were plenty of places along the way where I got choice paralysis. That just wasn't one of them.
No, I mean, I definitely get it as well. And it's, I mean, the fact that, like, I loved knowing that it's something like that is in second place, especially interesting when you realize, like, this is a super iconic cover that only people in Japan should have or have ever
Hmm.
really seen, because it's not that thing that you really associate with it. But again, kind of goes back to how special of a franchise this is, that like so many of us who are into SMT, we are unfortunately masochists who like to learn about things even if we can't enjoy them in their native language, and just be like, let me absorb all of this information, please.
Yep. Yep.
Let me see here. I had another question I wanted to ask you about with it. In terms of once the communications on your side and or with Lionwing, was this something that had to get brought up originally first with Atlas Japan, or would this have been like an Atlas West thing where they kind of had to liaison in between for you guys?
Yeah, I didn't even bother with Atlas West. I just went directly to
Are they
I
aware now? Do we need to like warn them? Are they going to be okay when this comes out? Are they okay?
no, they played a role later in the process, but I just instantly went to Atlas Japan. Especially because my business liaison, like my business relations person, is Japanese. It's just easier almost always to go through the Japanese company rather than the Western department or Western arm of that same company. So we went to Atlas Japan, and then so the I'm trying to remember how exactly this process went. So we went to Atlas Japan. From Atlas Japan, they had to pull in Sega Japan. From Sega Japan, it went back to Atlas Japan, which then went to Sega of America, which then went to Sega of Europe, which then went back to Atlas of Japan. And that's effectively how the roadmap was of who we needed to talk to, and who they kind of pushed us to as the next person in the process, because all of those folks had a part to play in this, to the point that Sega of America, Sega of Europe were giving feedback on our press release. So at one point, we had feedback on this live doc, from Atlas Japan, Sega of America, and Sega Europe, all with a comments box on our press release, kind of giving different perspectives, and that's how they wanted to do it. And I understood why, but it definitely was one of those times where like a lot of cooks were in the kitchen, and it slowed down the process. I totally understood why it needed to be that way, but definitely not terribly efficient.
No, and I mean like the amount of times I've heard stories of there's a really funny one that, man, when it finally comes out, I can't wait to bring them on, but like there is a project that's been in the process for Atlas in this company 7 years, and it's literally just something as simple, well, I say simple as localize this, bring this to America. And it's been so funny of like every now and then I'll check in and be like, hey, just making sure nothing got canceled, how'd everything go? And I'll be like, we're just still in the telephone game. It's just the world's longest telephone cord
Yep.
from Europe to America to Japan and back.
Yep. Yep. And what's funny is the telephone cord for us, actually, I don't think the telephone cord ever extended to Atlas West. I don't think we ever talked to anyone from Atlas West, not once.
Yeah, because like I mean, honestly, the way you had kind of listed it is pretty much the order of operations in terms of kind of where the corporate structure really goes for them, because especially when you compare Atlas Japan versus Atlas West, it's like Atlas West is just Sega, which is not even anything like wrong with it. It's like they are basically the exact same company. It just depends on what game is coming out versus everything, because like that's the same team who's working on it. Whereas like you go to in Japan, if you go to Atlas HQ, that is very much that is an Atlas building. That is a like Sega's their own thing, Atlas is their own thing. They just happen to be owned by one another, same parent company.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, but I mean that is so interesting as well, though, of all of the back and forth with it, especially even leading up to something like the press release, just because it's funny because like it goes back to that thing of like this is obviously for you guys and for the community and everyone interested a really really important and special kind of release coming out with it, but at the same time it'd be that thing of never in a million years would I expect this to be anything important in terms of an internal project. Like this is probably not going to be popping up on the end of the year financial like reports with it, but it does kind of go to show how seriously they take everything in terms of what they put out with it, especially when you kind of compare by comparison of like something like Persona definitely does get like a lot more kind of use in terms of licensed out things put out for it, whatnot, whereas like SMT, because it is still popular, but I think has a lot more hoops to sort of jump through, it's a very interesting comparison, especially considering they're all from that same family.
Yeah, but and you know what's interesting is, despite all of that, everyone at Atlas and Sega was like really into this, very on board with it. Even though in the beginning it was they didn't like, no one really knew about this book, and it took them a while to like talk to people within the company who kind of knew about the book. Um, Once we got past that, everyone was really willing to just like make this happen. And it is interesting because, yes, Shin Megami Tensei is not what Persona is. So I was a little worried initially, reaching out to them, that Atlas or Sega or whomever would say like, like if this was Persona, sure, but it's not. This isn't really, worth our time. But that was not the reaction that we got at all. Everyone there was awesome to work with, and wanted this, and really wanted this to happen.
Now, from the publishing side of things over in Japan, once you sort of started getting things worked out with it, were the discussions kind of surprising in terms of getting the rights to localize them? Was this just something like for you guys? Was it now like, and obviously, if there's things you're allowed to say versus not, I completely get it. There's so much kind of like hoops and red tape you always have to jump over or step around for it with things like this. But like, was this something as simple as, hey, we want to localize and publish this book. Can we do that? Because I know, especially with a lot of Japanese publishers, it's almost easier for them to do kind of like a bulk deal of like, okay, well, if you're already going to be going through all this work for it, why don't we see what other books you would want to localize or work with us? Was it something where there was sort of flexibility like that, or like how hard was it to kind of work with that publisher?
I mean, everyone for the most part was pretty easy to work with. It was, I think, where the hardship came from was just like people figuring out like what this is such an old thing. How do we even like unearth it?
Hmm.
I mean, even down to like how we had to translate the actual book, like the literal process of translation, how we didn't have any design docs. We had no Word docs. We were doing it with a book propped up on a reader with the translator reading, the book and then typing as she's reading the book that's on her desk. So that was the hardest stuff, is just trying to figure out like, where is this thing? And and there was no push for this to be done in sort of a larger deal. So it's not like we went to anyone and we're like, hey, we want to do this book, and they were like, well, okay, well, for it to make sense for us, really you need to do a couple of these books. And I don't know if that's what you're asking, but that's kind of how I
No,
heard
yeah,
it.
no, that, yeah, for sure, that was.
And it wasn't like that at all. I think everyone just saw this as like a per project type of thing, and I was very specific too. I wasn't even necessarily asking like, when I first started talking to all the people that I knew I needed to talk to, my ask was very targeted, and very localized. It was just like, I just want the Nocturne book. That's it. I didn't ask about any of the books before or after until much later down the road, once the deal was pretty much done, and once kind of everyone involved sort of trusted us, with the property. Then I started kind of floating ideas of like, what do you think about this, or what if we did this? But that really wasn't until much later on. You have to be careful with Japanese companies, especially if you don't have a proven track record or like a super deep portfolio, of asking for too much, because they then begin to question, A, your bandwidth, and B, your legitimacy as a company.
Hmm.
This project needed to happen when it needed to happen, because it took us that long to build up a portfolio of games that we released and that were like well received games. So the trust component is so big when you're working with Japanese companies, and you can't like come on too strong, out of the gates, because it puts them in the headspace of not wanting to do business with you, or having questions about you and your business and who you are. And I knew I didn't want to do that, especially with this being the first IP based game that I had gone for. I didn't want to come off as being overly ambitious, because I was afraid that they would think, well, okay, like big dreams crash hard, that kind of thing. Um, but I also didn't want to come off as being unfocused. And so it was just much easier to ask for one book for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. And quite frankly, I didn't really know if I wanted to do anything more than just this one book early in the process. I didn't know what the financial commitment was going to be for this. I didn't know what Atlas was going to ask for, or Sega, or Jive, or the authors, or the artists. I had no idea about how the financials were going to break down. And so I said, well, I don't, if I went for multiple books, I don't even know if I could afford that. Like, I don't know if I have the capital for that. And so, going for one book was much more financially viable as well, in addition to all the other reasons why I talked about.
No, and I mean, and I think as well that focus is nothing but beneficial for a project like this, and also listening to you kind of talk about that, it really strides home again something you mentioned at the beginning of the show of you wouldn't have wanted this to be like the first LionWing product, even if it could have happened with it. Of like, you guys, I'm sure, grow leaps and bounds as a team with each release in terms of learning lessons, way to like processes and everything go for it. Of like having not only that catalog of past works to be like, here's what we've put out, here's this tangible product, here's what people think, makes that case of pitching yourself to everyone so much easier, let alone than kind of having that extra support to lean back on.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on an important part here. Is not only did I have the outward facing stuff to consider when I was going for this project, but also, by the time we got to Nocturne's development, I had been working with the same set of translators and graphics folks and QA testers on several projects. And specifically, the translator that worked on this had worked on a lot of our previous projects, including some of our RPGs. And so she and I knew each other's style very well, by 2022 when we started working on this. And so it was important that this came along when it did, because by that point we had kind of worked out all the kinks, in the localization process. I came to the company with sort of a design doc, a design template of how I wanted us to handle localization, and I made sure that I always gave that to the folks who were working on these projects. But you're only ever going to, if you're doing your job right, you're only ever going to grow, evolve, and get better the more you do these things. And so for this to come effectively in like year 4 or 5 of LionWing's tenure, I think that was only of benefit to the end product, because by that point we had already figured out our process very well. And to be able to work, I did a lot of editing on the book myself, and so to be able to work with a translator whose style I knew, and to work with a translator who also knew what I looked for when I was editing things, just made for a very smooth process. Now, we ended up bringing on more editors, so it wasn't just me. But even then, it was much easier to sort of explain to them my vision and what I wanted them to be on the lookout for by this point, because I already knew exactly what I wanted. Where in 2018, 2019, even maybe 2020, I didn't exactly know what I wanted from these projects quite yet.
No, definitely, and I mean, I'm sure even the idea of what you thought you'd be publishing 4 years ago is probably night and day different versus what's planning on coming out later this year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, 4 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about tabletop RPGs. I was just doing the card game and the board game thing. So yeah, it really is like night and day. And as a company's products diversify, so too does its skill set, right? And so it was nice that this book came along when it came along, because not only did we have all this experience working together as a team on all these various projects, but by this point we had already done 3 RPGs. They weren't all out yet, and we hadn't announced all of them yet, but like the development stuff was done on them. So we had a very clear understanding of how LionWing was going to do TRPGs when this came along. And yeah, 4 years ago, this is not what I had in the cards for us. It's interesting, owning a small business, because you have to be willing and able to pivot pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like the only necessary skill you need to sustain and survive, especially in an industry that is an entertainment industry, when you're dealing in product that people don't need, and especially when you're in an industry that already isn't like a huge money-making industry. You really have to be willing to turn and be dynamic in your approach to these things. And you also, someone like me, I have to be able to read the market to say, like, okay, where's the market going? What are people wanting? What genres are dying? What genres are rising? Where's this genre going to be in 3 years when development is done on this? And is it going to be in a good place? Because if it's not worth the investment now. So it's just a lot of things that you've got to consider that goes into one single project. And I think people, when they hear development, like game development, they think of just like the nuts and bolts, like you're in the trenches doing the work on the game itself. There's like all this other shit that you got to think about and really have down. And like the nuts and bolts, the in the trenches work, like it doesn't even matter if you don't have all this other stuff in place.
And it's also like you mentioned of like moving around, because like while some people also might, whether they follow like card games, RPGs, tabletop RPGs and stuff for it, I feel like also from an outsider perspective, it's really easy just to kind of think, oh yeah, these are all very much like, oh, if you can do one, you can do all of them. And there are people out there who definitely have experience working in those fields for it. It's definitely not like a copy paste of your skills from one to another without any kind of learning curve. And I mean, I'm sure you even experience that coming from games to this as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like tabletop RPGs are just a different animal entirely from a card game or a board game. Card games and board games are pretty similar. There's still distinctions between the two, but honestly, those like card games and board games don't really share any qualities with tabletop RPGs. If I'm being honest, just totally two different mediums. People put them together because they hear tabletop, or they know that like all of that is attached to this kind of like larger holding company called Tabletop Games. But they couldn't be more different,
Mm-hmm.
and really are different mediums.
Kind of like going back a little bit for LionWing's history, at any point in the progress or process for SMT, you guys have done like Kickstarter in the past. Was there ever any moment of thinking, hey, should we just fund this like a regular project? Do we want to see if Kickstarter is kind of using like going to be, because I think Kickstarter, especially if people have mostly followed for video games, has definitely fallen off over the last couple of years for various different reasons. But I will say one of the big things that definitely does still keep a lot of attention on there are board games, tabletop RPGs, and card games and stuff like that for it. Was that ever kind of part of the process, or did that ever, like, was it always the plan of being like, no, 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 by the time we get the rights to this and put this out, we'll just do this ourselves?
No, it was just the opposite. The original vision was always Kickstarter.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
Kickstarter is such a vital component to the tabletop games industry and to that ecosystem, that I wanted this. And early in the process, I thought I needed this to go to Kickstarter. I think people, especially if you're not like in the tabletop gaming space, you hear Kickstarter, and especially if you're more like a video game person, you think of it as just like this funding platform. Like, okay, these creators need money to make this game, and yes, that's like obviously part of the thing. But for tabletop games, Kickstarter is actually less of like a development funding tool and more of a marketing tool.
100%.
Most people who are playing tabletop games are on Kickstarter, and honestly, most people are finding out about the next tabletop game from Kickstarter. So, in many respects, if you're a tabletop games company and you're not on Kickstarter, A, you're doing something wrong, but also B, you're not maximizing your audience, your reach, and your profits. So my original pitch to Atlas, once I realized like, hey, we've talked to all the right people and now we're going to go in front of Atlas, my pitch to them was Kickstarter. And I fought hard for Kickstarter. I put together proposal after proposal about why Kickstarter was the right platform for this project, not to fund it. That was never the problem. Like I had plenty of capital to fund this game internally. So I didn't need it for that. I wanted it for the marketing visibility of it all. And Atlas, they just would not, they would not listen to it. And I get it. A lot of especially Japanese companies think that crowdfunding kind of cheapens their brand.
100,000%. Especially Japanese companies especially have such an interesting relationship to it because like I think almost more than the consumers they're worried of how it'll look to. It almost feels like the few bad actors who've ever had Kickstarter blow up in their face, either at release, didn't meet funding, or something happened later on down the line, always scare them away more than the myriad of other cases of very successful, very popular, like Kickstarter or even just other crowdfunding campaign websites, because they think of those few like bad actor or like few moments that have gone poorly for other companies.
Yeah, and I get it. Like, I totally understand that thinking. Like, get burned once, you don't want to get burned a second time, right?
And I mean, I'm even thinking of optically, even without getting burnt, here would be their first worry of like PR. This game gets announced, goes to Kickstarter. I'm sure, and this happens with every Kickstarter that ever happens, especially if it's for any level of known IP. Oh wow, Sega's too cheap to just fund it themselves or whatever with it. Because like you look at something like all the like Kickstarter games like Sony has licensed to other like board game companies or RPG companies out there, of like Sony could easily fund 100 Bloodborne tabletop games.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not putting it on Kickstarter because they have to, or the company they worked with can't afford it. Like you said, it's a fantastic marketing tool, and it just is also a good marketplace of letting people know what they can get, what do you want. Like, it shows a lot of that ahead of time in a way that just putting something on your own website store just won't always get you.
Oh, absolutely. And people, at least in the tabletop space, I know this isn't the case with video games, but they generally trust Kickstarters. And, even when I look at my own like Kickstarter metrics, the vast majority of people who back our Kickstarters find our Kickstarters by using the search function, not for our game, but for some other game, and the algorithm spits our game in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a spontaneous purchase or a spontaneous back. Only a small portion of our Kickstarters get funded by people that subscribe to our newsletter or know about us or are following all of our releases and are anticipating the launch of that particular Kickstarter project. So it's really, really a vital part, as I said, of the ecosystem for tabletop games. And at the same time, it goes back to what you said, and I totally get it where a company like Atlas or Sega is coming from of like, okay, let's say Shin Megami goes to Kickstarter. What if, especially for a project like this, which there's really no comparison, what if it pulls in $40,000? What does that look like? What does that look like for the Shin Megami brand? That's not a good look. So I get the trepidation there. And at the same time, it's leaving money on the table by not going to Kickstarter. So I tried hard. I fought hard at various times to show why it was the right choice. And finally, they were essentially like, okay, dude, don't ask again. Like, we've already told you. Stop.
They don't understand the weird, like, nuance, tiny weird bonuses that could have been included if this was on Kickstarter.
Well,
The
I mean, that's basically what they said. We were like, okay, we get it. Like you keep saying all these like things, but like we don't care. We're not doing it. I'm like, all right, fine. But ultimately, it turned out just perfectly fine for us to go the pre-order route.
and I think there's no one reason to kind of get, because like the tough part is it's not like you can just say like, oh, well now all of our releases we won't have to do this with it, because it is very much like a case by case basis for it. Of like, I think this was a special case for two things leading up to release. One, this was something that a lot of people have been aware of for a long time, whether you're in the space or just a fan of the genre, along with the fact that this, for better or for worse, I would say for better, in my opinion, because of how long this kind of got announced early, it actually led to a lot of people kind of talking about it before its official announcement earlier this year. Like, we've known about this basically unofficially since 2023, and it's been kind of funny of like, because it wasn't ever like a sure thing deal yet, that almost acted like a bit of free marketing just from people being like, oh, hey, did you hear about this thing that popped up on Amazon and stuff like that? And I mean, like, I'd be super curious to be like, how is that for like you guys, when obviously the plan was probably not for a random Amazon listing to announce this game 6 months before it was supposed to, but in terms of being a free marketing agent, definitely helped a lot.
Yeah, someone pressed the wrong button. You know what? I was in my Discord the night that it popped up on Amazon, and the translator of the game DM'd me. I was like, Bradley, have you seen this? And I was like, I most certainly have not. I have now, though. You know, my initial like knee-jerk reaction was a little bit of panic.
Oh, for sure. Because I mean, there are many ways. I imagine for you, your biggest worry is how is everyone else going to react to this positively and negatively?
Bingo. I was worried about Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to react to this? I didn't really care about anything else, but I was worried how they would interpret it, because quite frankly, for me, I was like, oh, actually, this is great. This is free marketing. I don't got to pay for this. People will start talking about this. So that was fine with me. But I was like, oh my God. You know, I actually had a meeting scheduled with Atlas that Thursday, like the next Thursday after that leaked. And I remember going into that meeting like, okay, I got to face the music. Like, here we go. In front of the firing squad. This is not going to be pretty. And, you know, I mean, they were like, how did this happen? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, listen.
I'm only laughing because if there's any company, especially in the year 2023, who had multiple internal leaks early, Atlas should not be the company to be. It's like, how many Instagram interns have we fired at this company this year, guys? We've had so many things leak.
No, but I mean, like, ultimately they weren't like terribly upset by it. They just asked us like, hey, can you pull down those listings? And I was already working on that. But you know, I oftentimes, and I think I even said it in the showcase where we finally revealed this game, that like this was the internet's worst kept secret for a while. And people once we actually had like a couple different leaks. So we had the leak in December, but then we had another leak in like I want to say January or February.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
and it was one of those like, gosh, we just can't catch a break on this, can we? But at the end of the day, like, I actually think it helped the project. I really do. It built anticipation and got people talking, and that's always a good thing leading into an announcement. And so I wasn't upset about it ultimately, which I think is the best case, you know, scenario.
And I mean, like, for you as well, obviously, I'm sure there'd be a whole different world of if it had come out and everyone was either like, what is this? What I think actually the worst scenario for this would have just been it leaked and no one noticed. Like it went up, nobody said anything. Men's Health Journal didn't write any articles about it. Like the fact that it at least had a reaction, people shared it, and then also led to pre-orders has pretty much got to just be at least a little bit gratifying. Now, did that either long-term speed up or change or even delay any part of the actual official announcement in terms of like, okay, should we try and like push this up, or did things kind of stay the same in terms of the announcement timeline?
No, things always stayed the same. We announced when we wanted to announce, when we were planning to announce. And that was the thing, after this leak happened, we got inundated with people asking about it. And my approach was always just to like, I don't know if you watch pro wrestling, but they got a term called no sell it, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
so I just like no sold it all the time. Even when I was doing like my weekly streaming show and people would like jump into the chat and ask me about it, I would just totally no sell it. Because I knew I knew like if I fed into it and if I sold it, that would not be helpful. So it was much more interesting just to not act like it existed, even though everyone knew that it existed. And so there was also like part of me just that found it sort of comical to like brazenly act like I had no idea what this project was when it was very clear that I knew what this project was. So I was having a little bit of fun with it in that regard. But we were always planning on the March release, and we didn't even talk about like, oh, should we move it up or anything like that. I mean, honestly, we didn't give it a whole lot of attention like when it happened. Like that night that it happened, that's when like my anxiety peaked. But then after that, it was kind of like business as usual.
What was another one with it for for the showcase kind of leading up to it? You guys were doing a really good job of like leading up and letting people know, hey, we have some big stuff coming up, and sort of leading with it. Has that been something like you guys have found like success, like you'd want to sort of do going forward in terms of like those kind of like video showcases on your own side of it? Like, is it kind of fun in terms of controlling like the announcement process of that cycle, better to sort of like do it on your own platform? Like, I'm sure there are always like a million and one other ways to either officially announce something versus like even being something as simple as like, oh, hey, Atlas has 2 or 3 other things coming out this day, let's loop this in and get something on with them as well.
Yeah, we had talked with Atlas at various points in the process of like, how do we get this out there? Like, and I had often asked them like, what are you willing and what are you comfortable with doing with this project? Like, what are you willing to publicize about this, or are you not willing at all? In which case, that's fine too. I just need to know. And they kind of told me what they were, what they plan to do. And I said, okay, cool. Are you good if I'm the one who ultimately puts this out there first? And here's the format that I'm going to do it in. It's going to be with a bunch of other game announcements, but it's going to anchor the show. I'm going to have like 2 anchors, and it's going to be the final anchor of the show. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. So we had never done a showcase like that before. It's a ton of work, and a lot of things have to line up, of course, for that to happen. But once we got picked up by Diamond Distributors last fall, our business grew exponentially, almost like overnight. And so, to me, when we announced Shin Megami in that showcase, it made sense to do a showcase because we were at a point where we've got so many projects happening behind the scenes that it was time to announce several of them, because no longer are we the company that releases like 2 projects a year and they're all Kickstarter projects. Mm-hmm. We got all these projects coming up, and it's like, okay, we got to get the stuff out there. And quite frankly, I wanted to ride the coattails of Shin Megami because I knew a bunch of people were going to be tuning in, waiting to see this reveal. And so I made sure that it was the last reveal, and I loaded up the rest of the showcase with all this other stuff that people would never have known about or cared about or seen if I would have announce those things separately or not with Shin Megami. So there was a little bit of strategy there of using SMT to kind of buoy up these other projects, and it worked. In fact, it worked so well. We're going to do another showcase the end of summer, which we're just calling the LionWing Showcase 2.
Nice.
So we'll do a sequel, and we'll announce not as many projects. But we will be announcing several projects there, and it's thanks to how well this first one performed.
That's awesome. I mean, as someone who I am a sucker for marketing hype cycles. The more showcases, the better. I'm always such a fan of them in terms of when you know at least either the company and the stuff that they kind of put out. That's always fun of just being like, hey, I'm more of a fan first and foremost of what X company does, and I like learning about new projects through them and stuff like that. Like even with what we mentioned earlier in the show with like conception of like I like that process of finding out about new companies or new games and new things coming out through showcases like that. It's always such a blast.
Yeah, and we had never done anything like this, so I wasn't quite sure what all would go into presenting a showcase like this. I actually think I underestimated just how much work and time goes into getting this kind of thing right. I mean, that showcase wasn't terribly long. I want to say it was 14 minutes. Um, it was a ton of work. Like LionWing has always just been this up until recently. It was like this company I just did as a side job. Like I have a 9 to 5 job, and this was something that I just kind of did at night. So like I had never got into like the presentation aspect of any of this because like I didn't really need to, I didn't really want to, and I didn't really have the things to show off to like even necessitate something like this. So to be able to get in there and do this kind of, showcase presentation opened my eyes to a new way of kind of showing what LionWing is doing and reaching an audience in a way that we just hadn't before. And I too, I'm into hype cycles, and I'm into showcase presentations. Like I love Nintendo Directs. I love the Xbox showcase that they do. In fact, a lot of how I did that presentation, there are sort of two versions of the presentation. The one that I did live didn't have my intro, and then the one that's on YouTube does have a longer introduction. I even tailored that sort of after Phil Spencer and how he does his stuff because I like that presentation so much, and it made sense to do it with Shin Megami. And I think it worked. I really think it worked, so much so that I'm willing to do it again and put in all that work. And it also sort of shows that LionWing is evolving and growing as well. Just to say like, hey, we're at a point now where we can do these presentations, and in the past we never really needed to.
See, I'm just now imagining we're like 3 or 4 years away from you on a giant sound stage, giving the in-person E3 style showcase for future projects.
That would be fantastic. Black soundstage, black clothes, all black. I think that's how Phil Spencer does it.
I feel like at least like a mid-level like stepping stone to that would just be like whenever you guys are next going to Gen Con, do a panel, but then like the panel ends up just being a mystery showcase for everything that you get to do live.
It's not a bad idea at all. Not a bad idea.
No, that is that is super super funny, and I'm excited to hear that you guys are doing more. I'm glad that at least the reception for that, not only after doing it, because also I've been on the other side of it of watching people who do those showcases, and it takes so much work that it scares them out of ever wanting to do it again. Or like, no, I'm not doing this ever again. That was way too much work.
Yeah, well, and there's also those cases where people do it for the first time, they put in a ton of work, and then like it doesn't really like no one cares, right?
Yeah, that is the tough part because there are, especially I think for like a lot of independent companies or smaller companies out there, the time of when you do it and like the like kind of like atmosphere of what's out there. Like when I like see a lot of those smaller companies doing stuff like kind of during that E3 season, I'm always like, what are you doing?
Uh-huh.
Like I get it, I get it, I get why you're doing it around here. It's like, oh, hey, it's the 9th showcase of the day. Like they're gonna love watching this, and it's like just give yourself your own room. Like it's just setting yourself up for like being too like easily excused, which you never want to do. You never want to be like, oh, well, I didn't watch just because I've already watched like 8 of
Yep,
these this week, so I'm good.
that's right.
Kind of going back a little bit more though to the project with it. Another question I wanted to ask for you has been, especially kind of where you're at now. We're at an interesting point of like a lot of the major work has been done, but the product's not really out yet for it. At the moment, the ship date, is it still, would you say, quarter 3 of this year?
Yep, it'll be the end of quarter 3, so long as everything goes as expected.
Everyone listening to this has to knock on the nearest piece of wood they have on
That's
there.
right.
No jinxing this project. But assuming kind of where we're at for everything, has this made you any more optimistic to seeing any of those other future versions come out in English?
I don't want to talk about future projects necessarily. I will say this though. There is a Nocturne supplement that I would love to work with, that adds a bunch of new features to the game that I think.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to say the Nocturne tabletop RPG novel. That you were going to be like, only if the novel is popular, then we could really milk the rest of
Hey,
it.
I would love to publish the replay, because I think that's what you're talking about there.
Yes,
Um,
but I guess I should explain because like I don't think that's a thing like I've ever seen a Western tabletop game have over here.
Yeah, I mean, replays are becoming a little more common in the West, but they certainly originated in the East, and there is one for Nocturne, and it's really cool. The art's terrible, so that art would have to be recommissioned. Um,
Selectively
it,
terrible.
no, it's pretty much uniformly terrible. Uh, but yeah, so there is a supplement called Amala Deep World that I would love to do something with. It would make a lot of sense uh, to publish that, but at the end of the day, these things aren't necessarily in my control. There's a whole lot that I want to do with Shin Megami Tensei for the tabletop. I would love to be known as the Shin Megami Tensei tabletop company. I'd love for that to be our claim to fame. And so I would love to do that supplement. I would love to also explore other settings. Digital Devil Saga is my favorite SMT uh, set of games. So I would love to do something with DDS. I think it probably is a better business move to do something with SMT5. Um,
I mean, hey, now Habino at least kind of looks like they would fit in with the DDS crew.
yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, I mean, I would love to play in SMT5's world, on the tabletop. So the answer is I hope and desperately want to return to this universe, in TTRPG format. It's all in Atlas's hands, though. So as I've been saying since we announced this project, if you want to see those things, if you want to see more SMT, uh, let Atlas know. Let them know that you want to see more of these TTRPGs. Let them know you want the old books published. Let them know you want new books published. Whatever it is, I think that's going to be a really critical piece to get them on board with doing more than this outside of the Nocturne books.
For sure. And I mean, along with it, I think the communication and the hype kind of leading up to release is definitely going to be one thing. I think it'll also go a really long way if we can also see not only, okay, hey, sales wise it's really cool if it's doing well, but like I'll be really interested to kind of see like what do people kind of do once this game is in the other players' hands. Like that's what makes me like the most excited about this, of like ever since this got leaked last year, I pretty much have hit up all of like my similar like either friends or people we've had on the podcast or other people who do like Atlas related stuff on YouTube, of just being like, oh, like we're already locking in, like once this is out, we're all going to run a game and stream the entirety of it for like everyone, is like a big like crossover thing, because what other thing like this would ever come out where we could all do this together?
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna be very interested to see what people do with this system, the stories they tell, um, the characters they make, because a lot of that will indeed inform, if we were to work in this universe again, where we kind of go from here, especially if we look at, developing brand new material. Like I said, I don't know if any of this is going to happen. It's all up to Atlas. But some of that would definitely inform the direction that we went with this.
Let's see. I'm gonna do my best to resist talking about Digital Devil Saga being 20 years old this year, making me feel extremely old, and go to the next question, which would be, let's see here. Kind of going into, we had talked a bit about which version was most popular. Obviously, at launch, there was not really a version to have like all three cover variants for it. Was that like something kind of easy for you guys to add as an extra SKU in terms of like, all right, hey, what should we really do with it? Because originally it was just, all right, do you want the PDF, a hardcover version, a version with both, or that's it?
Yeah, like I said, I had these art files, kind of a late game call, and it's like, yeah, let's do some different covers. Let's make it interesting, even though, that was never in the original release. And Atlas was, they gave me this art and they were like, do whatever you want with it. And I was like, whatever I want with it? And they're like, whatever you want with it. So I said, cool, I'm going to make more books with all this art on it. And they're like, cool, we don't care. We told you can do whatever you want with it. Stop bothering us. So I mean, that's kind of how that played out. It was interesting talking with the author, because the Japanese release was a soft cover game, and it was only the blue variant of the Demi-Fiend for the cover. And so to be able to talk to Takeda-san and say like, hey, we're going to offer all these different covers, and we're going to kind of give this book a fresh coat of paint. He couldn't have been more excited by it. And even the inside of the game's layout, we kept as much of like the visual elements of the original Japanese release, but kind of reorganized them and put our own touch on some of these things and presented them to him like, hey, what do you think of this? If you don't like it, we won't do it. But if you do like it, we're definitely going to do it. And he was on board with that too. So, I think probably me and Takeda-san were the ones who were most excited about these, about all these covers.
I'd be curious for it. I'm trying to look it up to see if it's out there at the moment. What do you happen to recall off the top of your head what the size difference is between the original version versus these hardcover?
So it's actually going to be the same size. So it's a B5 format size, which is basically 7x10. The only difference is ours are going to be hardcover instead of softcover.
See, because like the only other like extra like collector baity ways this could have gone anymore is if like the 3-pack, then it's just like, oh, also here, would you like the slip cover to hold all three versions of the same game, and then you can just have your little like display shelf for the 3 books.
I will say this about that: sometimes you got to hold on to certain ideas for other things in the future.
But no, it's funny, as someone who's like, I'm getting all 3. This is like the most first world problem thing ever for it, but it's like, I've thought about this so much and I still don't have an answer. I don't know which one I want to use though.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I know I'm going to get them all, but I'm like, which will I like want to actually be using to play with? Because like, I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, I don't want to like open them all for it, whatever with it, but it is that funny thing of like, well, I'm not going to be lugging all 3 of these around whenever I like want to play this for it. But it also does kind of like make me think about the fact of, hey, this is really interesting. Not only are you guys bringing this out, but also making a digital version, because God, I'm sure you guys would have loved having a PDF copy while localizing this thing.
Yeah, that would have been beautiful. What's really funny about that? So we did the whole development, like I said before, book propped up on the translator's desk and just typing. About a month after development ended, Takeda-san was like, so we found the Word docs.
Oh my God.
I was like, oh no. You should not have even told me that. So yeah, that was a funny little thing. What's interesting about, you said you grabbed all 3 covers. So we have what's called our LionWing, our ultimate LionWing bundle, where we package all 3 of the books together and you get a discount. We only put that up there because people asked for it, which I was not anticipating at all. We didn't
Mm.
have that as a product to buy, and then a bunch of people were like, "Hey, can I just buy all of the covers in one order instead of having to add them all to my cart?" And I was like, "That makes a lot of sense." And I'll do you one better. I'll even throw in a discount for you. So that was kind of like customer requested, which I think some people look at that and they're like, "Oh my gosh, look at these greedy bastards!" Throwing together this ultimate LionWing bundle for $150, and it's like, no, I just did what people wanted. I promise.
Listen, you were just like, sir, you don't need 3 PDF copies of this book. I guarantee you. Like,
I
please.
think I even
For
said in my Discord, I was like, I don't think you need 3 copies of this book, but I will certainly gladly take your money if you want to buy 3 copies of it.
I am a sicko for variant covers. The only thing that gets me more excited when I see variant covers are like convention exclusive
Oh yeah,
variants, which are the bane of my
yep.
existence. Also, this doesn't happen as much, especially with books. But in the few cases where it does happen, it's more so a thing with video games. Banned covers, like covers that got printed but then had to get pulled. Like those are like my wet dream of like covers. I love
That's
that.
fair. Yeah, no, that's good.
It's like this is the cover the ESRB doesn't want you to have. I
Yeah.
was like, oh man, now I have to have
Uh-huh.
it. Um, Kind of though, like going back into the uh different versions and like reception to it for it, has any part of this since announcement sparked any like interest for other languages or even like a Japanese reprint of this happening? Like, has anyone been like, hey, I've got that book from 20 years ago, I'd like that reprinted in Japanese, please?
Actually, yes. So about a month ago, I found out that they are doing a reprint of the Japanese version of the book, which, of course, Tokita-san was just ecstatic about. So this definitely opened the door to that happening, which I'm excited for him, um, for that opportunity, because I know he's very proud of this book. And he wrote most of the SMT TTRPG books. So he's just very proud of this series in general. So for him to get kind of a second chance in his own territory to sell the book again is just really cool. But we've had a ton of people from various publishers reach out like, "Hey, have you thought about, or would you give us the rights to do a French version, or a Spanish version, or whatever the case may be?" And my answer to them is always kind of the same. Like, guys, I only like I just own the rights to the English version. Like, if you want to do your own thing in another language, you're going to go through all the trouble that I did to get that, because I can't do anything.
What are you saying? You didn't do everyone's favorite thing in localization and copyright your localization exclusively?
Yeah, no, that's yeah, no, no.
That is like that's got to be. I'm like it's gotta definitely feel gratifying, but also is it gotta be a little bit weird to also with like have other because I assume like has this happened with any of your other releases of being like, oh hey, this is going to now spark a reprint for this like X-year-old product or something like that. Like, is that almost like kind of got to be like a weird humbling feeling of like I would be shocked if this ever got reprinted if this wasn't happening.
I mean, it's never happened before for us, and I hadn't even considered it as a possibility. So it
Because
was.
I mean, it's not like the book is extremely common. Like it definitely holds its value. I mean, it is literally going to be 20 years old. Like come the end of this year for it. So like it's definitely been out of circulation for long enough.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, if you try to grab a book on the secondhand market now, I haven't looked at it in a while, but when I got my copy, it was $650. Um, so it's extremely hard to find the book, and it's impossible, quite literally impossible to find it for a reasonable price. You're probably not going to pay under 150 at this point. I think the market has come down on it a little bit. But yeah, you're probably still looking at a minimum buy in 150, $200. Uh, so for it to get a reprint, it makes a lot of sense, because once this was announced, uh, Tokita started getting blown up with people, Japanese players, like, "Hey, are you doing? Is this going to be available in Japanese? Blah blah blah." Um, so no doubt that this, the reception of the English release opened the door to this second printing.
Now I have to ask, as like, from one very big collector to another, personal bias and everything aside for it, anyone's on the table, alive or dead, who involved with this original book would you want to have sign your copy once you get your sample off the press?
So all of the creatives that were involved in the book are still alive. I know that because I paid them all royalties.
The best answer any author could hear.
Yes. So naturally, I would say Takita's signature, but that seems like really obvious that I would say that. So instead, what I would say is I would ask for the map illustrator's signature. So this book has a bunch of hand-drawn maps, and they are beautiful, and they are illustrated in a way that people just don't illustrate maps in games anymore in this type of style. So I would ask for his autograph for sure. And he's I mean, everyone who worked on this project is an older gentleman at this point. But I definitely would love to have his name on one of my books.
Just need like a really elaborate release party in Japan for it'll just be like we're just gonna take all of you guys out drinking and for dinner for one night. Just write your name on this one book and that's all you got to do.
Listen,
and I'm never gonna ask you for anything ever again.
I would love to do that, but the map illustrator is so removed that we had to do snail mail contracts.
I mean, at least it was for the contracts, and it wasn't like you had to have them like hand ship you off like originals. So at least there's that.
I mean, yeah, there is that. But it might be a little hard to get him to come in for a big celebration. But I certainly would love it.
Man, that is so funny. Which like now also I hope there's like some like weird third party like scalper of this book who's been holding off and making a cool $300 to $400 on these like on like Yahoo auction Japan sites and just be like, I can't believe it, LionWing, you're my arch you've crashed the market. How am I supposed to scalp this 20-year-old RPG book now?
You know what's funny though is although the book was super expensive, there was only ever like 2 at any given time available. It would always be like one was available from some seller on Amazon JP, and then you'd find one for like an offensive amount on Yahoo auctions. But there would never be like 10 available. You'd only ever have 2 at any given time. So like whoever has these books are holding on to them.
The real fans
That's
out
right.
there. I would be curious, do you happen to have any inkling at all of what the original Japanese might have like been printed in?
What do you mean by printed in?
Like number in terms of like, oh, there was anywhere between like 10 and like 25,000 copies.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I know the print run number, but I don't feel comfortable giving it.
No, that's see. I always find it like kind of like that morbidly curious thing of like not even from like a collector side. I'm always so interested, like I'm the guy who gets more excited seeing like where things are in like the sales ranking for like Japan, Europe, and America and stuff for it, like, and it's never in a like, oh yay go corporations. It is just that interesting of like I always loved in like how much was something printed versus like expectations, demand, and like I always love when you like see those articles of like, oh, X product came out, like Unicorn Overland's a great one of like me being like terrified before that game came out and then seeing the stories in Japan of it being like it's been sold out, nobody has any copies, though we only made like 5,000 of them. Like I like seeing those stories just because it's like it gives you an interesting kind of peek in behind of like, okay, where were these people at in terms of how many they thought they needed versus like how many actually were going anywhere.
You know what's interesting about like sales targets, sales expectations, and real numbers is no matter the scenario, it's not a good one, and it never is in your favor. So if you underprint and you've got high demand, you're leaving a ton of money on the table by not being able to sell books to people because you don't got the books to sell. And by the time that you've got the books to sell them, they've moved on. So you've lost out on that sale. Now, some people will they'll be retained. Their interest will be retained, and when you have your second printing or whatever it is, they'll show up for that and they'll get it. But those people are in the minority of those folks who didn't get it the first time and won't return for it a second time. But the opposite is also awful, of where you overestimate demand, you have a ton of books, and you don't sell many, because then you're just sitting on product.
You've just got a garage full of pallets.
Yeah, so like neither scenario is good for you. The problem is you're always in one of them. No, you're always in one of them. No one's ever going to be.
No one is ever. Oh, I've printed the perfect amount. Yep. We hit expectation.
It does not happen. I mean, even like your huge publishers, that does not happen. I mean, so being with a big book distributor, I get access to all of this like market data, and I see all the sales of every single book, like dating back 20 years through current. And I also can sometimes see what the print run is, and you look at big companies, and you see what's been ordered and what's been purchased, and you're like, oh wow, okay, so it's not just me. It's not just me who can't get it right.
God, I would be like undetached of like morbidly flipping through that entire thing, just looking up the most interesting or like unrelated bits of like data for releases. That would be way too tempting of a document to have access to.
It's pretty cool data to have for sure.
Let me see here. What was another one I was going to ask about related to this? So, we've kind of talked about it for like a little bit, because I've been trying not to go either way too heavy in terms of coming at this from a video game fan versus a tabletop fan. I would definitely call myself way more of a casual in terms of my personal experience with tabletop RPGs, but a lot of that also comes from having a lot of friends who do the weekly or multi-week meetups and stuff like that for different campaigns or books or games like that. I was curious for you, for any SMT fans out there who this is probably going to be their first tabletop RPG, do you have any recommendations for after Tokyo Conception, or even one while they're waiting for this to actually ship out, in terms of, hey, this is a good jumping off point, or this is maybe thematically similar?
Yeah, so I'm gonna show my own stuff here. So the bulk of our RPGs are not necessarily RPGs for RPG players. So much so that, like, when you go into a bookstore and you look for LionWing stuff, our RPGs are not in with the rest of the RPGs. They're in with the manga and light novel section, because the bulk of our audience are casual gamers. So if you look through our catalog and you look at what we've published, almost none of our games are RPGs that have more than 150 pages. All of our RPGs use very accessible rule sets, because accessibility is a huge thing in Japan with tabletop role-playing games. They try to make each RPG as accessible as possible. And so if you look at our catalog of games, you are bound to find something thematically that you like, and you could just pick any of them, and you would find that these games are probably tailored to you. As a casual TTRPG player, our books are perfect for you. What's even more perfect is, starting this summer, we're kicking off a new product line called our LionWing Quick Play series. And these are RPGs that are specifically designed to be jumping off points for people who have never played an RPG before. These are like super short, almost like micro RPGs that are low in page count, low in rules complexity, and low in cost. These books are like $15. They're like 60 to 75 pages. Most of them can be played with just two people, though a lot of them can just be played solo if you want to play by yourself. Though you can certainly play with more players than that. And all of the rules are super streamlined and written in a way of where you can probably read the rules and understand the game in about 10 minutes. The thing that, what's funny about tabletop role-playing games is they're their own worst enemy. Like, the barrier to entry for TTRPGs is TTRPGs.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, like who wants, like even I like, this is my business, and like I look at these TTRPGs that come out, and like they're these giant tomes of text. They're 500 pages, they're $50. They weigh about as much as my 3-year-old, and the rules consist of about 200 of those pages from the rule book. And I'm like, I'm not playing that. Like, no, I got better things to do with my
It's
time.
it's tough because it's almost like that feeling you get when you recommend someone a really great game that just so happens to be a 150-hour RPG. Because it's like, listen, buddy, please, you gotta believe me. It really starts picking up after chapter 11. And it's like, even if that's the case, there are just a couple of things that will scare people away, even if something is tailor made for them, of like either the size of it, the price of it, and the big one that always sucks for me are those games that the time scares people away. And I can't, it's like nothing is harder to kind of value than people's time these days. Of like, if you see a really interesting new game and it's like, oh cool, what's the average game time, and it's like, oh, it's a 4 to 5 hour long game. And it's like, yeah, like most people don't have that just to be able to do at a moment's notice.
Well, not only that, but like that game time is the game time once you learn the game.
That's true. You have to, read the Bible first and then learn how to
Yeah,
play.
that's reading the book and then fucking up a whole bunch and then finally being like, "Oh, I get it. Now I understand the game." Okay, our 5 hour starts now after you've
If
already
I
put in
had a
6 hours.
if I had $1 for every time I've started, because I've gotten a lot better with this now, but my wife was a really good like litmus for me of like, okay, what does a normal human being think if I'm having to explain X, Y, or Z to them? Just because she has no nostalgia with any of this stuff usually that I show her, or anything to really compare it to, of like growing up around it will kind of meld it into you a lot easier for it, especially with games like this, whether they be complex or simple. But like card games has been an interesting one of me teaching her. I will be like, all right, here's the game, and I'm going to just read you the rules, beginning to end, from a turn to ending the game. And in my brain, I'm like, oh, this makes perfect sense. We're reading the rules for it. When in reality, most of it just ends up being like, you know what? It's going to seem overly complicated and not fun. Just play and I'll tell you what to do each. And like, I'll let you know when either you do something right or you do something wrong, because it's so hard to win people back once you've scared them out of being like, I don't want to have. Like, if this seems like homework, they don't want to have to learn how to do it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Exactly. And that's why TTRPGs will always have a ceiling. Um, and it will be lower than it should be. So yeah, I would say go check out our stuff. Whether you like mech suits and Common Rider stuff, you can check out our Convictor Drive TTRPG. Or whether you like Yakuza and Persona, you can check out our Picaresque Roman TTRPG. Whether you like witches, you can check out our Fledge Witch game, which is like a Kiki's Delivery Service, the game TTRPG. Or you can check out our Dark Souls and Bloodborne inspired game called Eldritch Escape. That's just a 2-player game with a solo mode. Or you can check out our first installment in the LionWing Quick Play series called Steam Build Riders, which drops this summer. And you only have to have 1 to 2 people to play that game as well. So, of course, I'm going to market my own stuff to you. And that's where I'd say you should spend your time and your money if you're going to check out some other RPGs aside from Shin Megami.
Awesome. And also, I mean, who doesn't love Eldritch Horror and dice? Like,
Right?
what's a better combination of two
Yeah,
hobbies?
exactly.
Let's see what's another one we had here for it. When it comes to localizing, especially for something that has been out on the market for so long and is entering a new one for the first time, is it hard to resist kind of making those little tweaks or changing or balancing of the game overall, or is it mostly just trying to be as faithful as possible while localizing it?
So for me, it's about being as faithful as possible to localizing it. Like, listen, like the game got popular exactly as it is. I don't want to go and mess with the secret sauce. Because yes, it's true. If you go and you mess with the secret sauce, you might come out with a special sauce, or you might come out with an awful sauce. I'd rather just stick to the special sauce, secret sauce. Don't mess with the recipe, because it got you to the dance in the first place. It was good enough. Uh, that being said, some designers have come to us and said, like, hey, we'd like to with the English release, we'd like to fix a few things. Either some errors or some balancing issues, or they want to tweak a mechanic that after many years of retrospectively looking back on it and analyzing it, they decided is needing changed. Like, I'll listen to that. It's their book. I'm just a guest here, right? Like, this is their work. I'll do whatever they want to do. But I will always come at a project as if we are going to translate it exactly as it is. Just kind of how I do business.
I thought it was a bold and brave decision for Tokyo Conception to ask not only for your social security card, but also credit card number before starting any game. I thought no other game is really ready to just take from the player as much or as quickly as this game is.
I mean, honestly, though, like the game is really good. I would never want to mess with that. Not to mention, I'm not a designer. Like, who am I to come in and say like, well, I think you should change this? It's not.
Well, and I mean, also, it is kind of like that Pandora's box of like, even if it is something as minor as, oh, we moved this feature or we morphed this or changed this into something else. It either then opens that box of, okay, well then where does the buck really stop with the changes before this is just another new product? Like this isn't that original game anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what, like these things also have a bit of a butterfly effect. Like you change one thing and you mess with the whole balance of the game. Like these things have to be the way they are to produce the game that I wanted in the first place. Ultimately, if I'm like, well, I've got to change this and I've got to change that, then that means I should just like look for a different game because that's not the game for me, because clearly I don't like it. The games that I choose, I like them exactly as they are. So I myself don't have any desire to change anything, because if I had a desire to change things, that's probably an indication to me that I've chosen the wrong project. But if the designer's like, hey, I want to change this, then I'm like, okay, well, it's your call. Now, I will say this happened with one other design team that we're working with currently, where they said like, hey, we want to introduce a couple quality of life features. And I said to them like, hey, like there's no agenda behind this question. This is not a leading question. This is like very authentic. Like, are you sure you want to do that? Because you know that the book works the way it does currently. Do we really need to go and change anything? And that was one of those times where I just posed that question and they kind of talked about it amongst themselves, and I was there just to listen to their process. And they ultimately said, okay, maybe we won't implement all of the quality of life changes. We'll just implement a couple, because I think you're right on this. And it's like, okay, cool. Like if you would have said, let's implement all the QOLs, I would have been like, cool. If you would have said like, no, we don't want to implement any of the QOLs, I would have been like, cool. It's whatever. You're the designer. I'm just posing questions to make sure we're covering all of our bases.
Mm-hmm. And for you guys during the like process, especially as like a localization and publishing, do you find yourself doing more or less, I guess, like testing of the game, or is it more of just a, hey, how are, like, ranging the, because obviously localization is far from just a one-to-one translation, but when you're trying to kind of keep that faithfulness of that game, does it still require a lot of games to either test it, see how it flows, see how it's playing in English versus playing it in Japanese? Like, how much does that kind of take up of that time for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, you got to test it, right? I mean, tabletop games are just like any other product that you're selling. You got to QA it. And in fact, you probably need to QA it more than the average product, because words are funny. So is grammar. It's amazing in the tabletop gaming space how just the misplacement of a comma can break a game.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like you were talking about card games before. I think about Magic. A bad comma placement changes a card's mechanic, and that breaks the game. So you have to play test these things, because as much as you have to and want to stick true, to the original source work, you got to make sure that it plays the way it's supposed to as well. And sometimes, we don't always choose the right word for the right mechanic or situation, and you only catch that by QAing it, and by sitting down and playtesting it and saying like, you know what, I think we chose the wrong synonym here, because there's like a little bit of nuance here that I think is going to confuse people. So let's change that word. So it's an integral part of the process for sure, just like anything else.
Yeah, and I mean a large part of it kind of going back to um, talking about those changes and whatnot with it of like you're not gonna know how this sounds. It kind of goes back to like from my experience in years of like editing as well for it of like you may write the best paper or the best like anything you've ever done if you are either the best in your field or the worst in your field, but until you either say it or play it or do it in action, it is so funny of how things will just come across differently when you're in a group of 3 to 4 other people doing something and reading it out loud or seeing how it naturally kind of flows off the paper once it's actually coming out of people's mouths.
Oh, for sure. I tell my editors all the time, like, read your edits out loud. Don't just read it in your head,
Yes.
because you're going to fill in
Yes.
blanks that don't exist in your head. Read it out loud, and then when you're also editing, read sentences backward to make sure you caught everything. So it is really important to have that space to not only hear yourself say it out loud, but to also have people hear you say it out loud, because you might hear something different than the other person hears it, even though you're listening to the same sentence being read out loud. You know what I mean? So it's a vital part of the process, especially for a tabletop RPG. I mean, these are massive books in many ways. Like I said, Shin Megami is not one of those short books. There's a lot of text in here, and you got to make sure you get it right. And the way you do that is you QA and you QA and you QA and you QA.
It's kind of funny too because it makes me think about similarly when people are reading off of a script that was either meant to be read versus like said aloud. One of my favorite things to do if I'm at somewhere that is either hosting a speaker or if I'm speaking at like a panel or an event or something, I love listening in on other people to see their process, because one of my biggest things as well, and I can never tell if this comes from writing or my experience either like editing other people, myself, or writing as well, I can always tell if this person is writing for themselves in terms of like, oh, I'm someone who writes a lot, so I'm going to read what I wrote, versus I'm going to write for the way that I speak. Because it's always such a different thing of like when you can just tell someone is like one of my like favorite examples without like using myself as an example for it, like probably one of my first or second reviews I ever posted on YouTube, because for years I had been in media and just did written reviews. So I was like, okay, well, hey, I'm coming from an era of an IGN or a Game Trailers. When they do a review, it is that person reading their review verbatim into your ears, and it's so stilted, it's so dry, it doesn't feel like someone's telling you something. It feels like I'm doing the world's worst audiobook reading of my review.
Yeah.
Which is like funny because like at the same time I would be talking about said game on the podcast, and I'm saying it in a much more clear, concise, and nuanced way for either shorter or longer, but because it's coming through in a conversation versus I'm doing this for the most aesthetically written way versus I want you to enjoy this.
Yep, for sure.
Another one I was curious about with it was, let's see here, any interesting like memories from playtesting this, either yourself or watching others? I was like finishing up the second video of the like kind of, I guess would you call like a playtest, like the ones that have been going up on the YouTube channel?
Oh, the actual play series. Yep.
Yes, yeah, the actual play, I just finished up the second episode a couple of days ago for it, and it was kind of funny, like, looking back on it, like, watching through, basically for the first time experiencing this game through that playthrough. Have you had any, like, takeaways on your end of either a game you played or watching other people play for it?
It was cool to see the actual play for the first time. So obviously I organized the actual play. I gave everyone the characters they were going to play. the scenarios that they were going to play through. So I kind of knew the content of what they were going to experience as a group. But that doesn't mean anything in the RPG space, because once that content gets to the table and people bring it to life, then it takes on a life of its own. Then it's not just a scenario on a piece of paper. It's not just a character bio with some stats. It's people acting out the lives of these characters as if they are their own. And I would say my favorite memory, honestly, of like people playing uh, the game itself was actually episode 1 of that actual play. And for the first time, not being a part of the playing and just watching other people do it, and not having me at the table or anyone else explaining like, hey, here's how it works, whatever. Just watching people play the game as if people are going to play it, come the end of this year. Like, this is how people are going to tell stories. These are the questions people are going to ask in real time as they're telling these stories and figuring out this system. And another group could play that exact scenario with those exact characters and come to a different destination that is unlike the group that played in that actual play. And I think that's what's so magical about TTRPGs, is you can put the same scenario in front of two different groups, and they're going to interpret and carry out that scenario in two totally different ways. A TTRPG play group takes on a life of its own. It's its own thing. It's like a living, breathing thing, and you can't replicate that with any other group, because every group is going to have their own living, breathing thing that only they can create in that moment, in that time, at that table, with those people and with that game. So being able to see the actual play and to finally see other people take this on for their own wasn't something I had really seen yet. And it's illuminating to see people interpret your games or your words in ways you meant, and also in ways you didn't mean. And that was a pretty special moment when I got the raw video and audio of that, and I was going through and looking at it. That was a cool moment.
I'm excited and nervous at the same time to start playing as well, because I think what we're going to end up doing is I'll probably be the game master for the first one, but I've always been interested but never actually ran a campaign myself, so I'll be very kind of curious of like throwing myself into this for like baby's first GM to see how much of a train wreck it will inevitably end up becoming.
Nice. Yes. Yes.
Another one, this kind of goes back to what we talked about with the Kickstarter discussion, but I was curious, were there any other scrapped ideas for the release that either changed over the course of the process to kind of getting here, such as like a collector set, any other like weird items, or even something like a shop atlas like variant cover or anything like that that was ever either you pitched or proposed to you?
Yeah, there were a lot of ideas that I pitched, and I'm hesitant to go into them because some of them we might actually be able to implement in the future, um, with some future content. So I don't want to let the cat out of the bag on that one. But there were definitely a number of different types of products attached to Tokyo Conception that we wanted, that we pitched, and either were turned down on, or decided either separately or with Atlas to perhaps do it at a later date. But really, when
Gotcha.
it came down to it, and again, not having any market data to pull from, not knowing what the turnout was going to be, running a more lean pre-order campaign like this, where you're really just looking at books and you're not looking at any accessories or ancillary content like dice and dice trays, collector's boxes, all that good stuff. It made more economics. It made more economical sense to run it the way that we're running it right now. And certainly now that we know what the turnout was and we know what the interest level actually is, now you might find that we do some new things if we were to ever work in this universe again.
Okay. And kind of going off of that for it, we had talked a little bit about even looking forward ahead of not even just localizing, but maybe even kind of dipping your toe into another game as a tabletop RPG altogether. how would that process, like in your head, kind of have to start in terms of finding a designer, or would you want to, like, would it be a case of, hey, I want to try and make this the best thing I possibly can, or would it be like, hey, how do we find slash grow a team that could design this next game, whether it be a DDS RPG or an SMT5 based RPG?
Yeah, so if we got approval to do anything like that, again, these are big ifs. It it would be a no-brainer for me to figure out who was going to design the thing. It would be Takeda-san, because he and I have already talked about it, and he would love to return, to SMT for another book, for something new. Obviously, he's got a ton of history with it. This is kind of his baby, and so being able to not revisit it in the way that he's revisiting it now, which is just revisiting a book that's already been out there, even if it's getting a second printing in Japan or its first printing in the West, but being able to then go back to that series and to create something new, which is what he did for a decade with the series, actually more than a decade. He wrote the vast majority of these books, and there's, damn near 20 books in the series. So, like, this is his thing. This is, I don't know if he would say that this is his legacy as a designer, but as someone on the outside looking in, to me, this is his legacy. And so to be able to continue to contribute to that legacy with an SMT5 setting, DDS, Soul Hackers, whatever the case may be, I think he would be ecstatic. And I wouldn't want anyone designing the game other than him, because A, he knows the system the best, but also because this is his legacy, he's going to be able to put something into that game that no one else is going to be able to. Even the best designer is not going to be able to put into that game what Takeda-san will be able to put into it, because they would not have the attachment to it like he does. And so he would be my designer. However, if we looked at not just doing another book, but we looked at adding in scenario booklets, settings booklets, not just additional rule sets and whatnot, then what I'd like to do is I'd like to grow a larger team. Takeda-san in the center, he handles all the core books, all the core information, and is sort of the repository of information as it pertains to this series. And then we've got other writers producing content, much like a D&D or a Pathfinder, insert TTRPG book here. That's how I would like to do it, and kind of grow the team and have SMT the RPG be an evergreen brand for LionWing, something that we are continuously producing and promoting content for.
And I mean, I think another kind of similar interesting comparison you could make would be something like, it didn't necessarily, or still hasn't really come back in too much of a meaningful way, but kind of going back to bringing back the old with a bit of new was, did you see like when Bandai back in like, I think it was 2022, had done basically a reprint but a new set of those old SMT trading card games? Yep. Like, I think something like that would be like a good example of like, this is such an evergreen kind of universe of like, hey, there's nothing really stopping you from just being like, here's the Soul Hackers book, or here is the Persona 2 like Innocent Sin one, or the expansion set with it, because they all kind of align next to each other so well with those similar themes, universes, demons, and things like that, even if they artistically look very, very different, just because that core kind of universe is there. And modernizing it, I think, does have such an interesting sort of potential. I honestly think the hardest part for me, outside of can we make it happen and make it make sense in terms of like the money side of things, the tricky part would then just sort of be, where do you start? Because it's almost kind of like, where's like the most interest in terms of like creatively where we're at, or do we just want to go with whatever is the new hotness and stuff like that,
Yeah, and Takeda and I have talked about some potential paths forward if we were ever, allowed to explore this. And I feel pretty good about what those paths would look like. Certainly we would have to choose a path, but we've got some pretty decent roadmaps laid out in the event that something like this happened. But it's, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. There's a reason why I put the role-playing game into the title, and why I gave this one a subtitle, because it would be nice to be able to, visit these different sides of Shin Megami, and the next one isn't Tokyo Conception. It's something related to DDS or whatever the case may be. So I tried to pad in as much that I could to allow us room for growth and further creativity in releases, just in the name by itself. But then, going back through and actually already having talked to Takeda-san about how we would do this, I think shows our commitment to wanting to do this. We just have to show Atlas that it's worth their time.
I just can't wait to live in a world where I can say, all right, everybody, come over to Spencer's house. We're all going to play his favorite game, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, the role-playing game, and maybe my wife will show up.
Dude,
Maybe.
dude, I would love to play some TMS TTRPG.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, there's potential there as well for the history of Fire Emblem tabletop, as well as SMT. Just saying, there's a lot of crossover.
You know how complicated that situation would be?
Oh, trust me, there would be. We would have to. I'm sure somehow the J-pop industry would find a way to shut it down before Nintendo even saw it. They'd be like, "No, we're not even going to let you license the background music for this game."
Yeah.
I've got a couple of last ones here for you because I know we are already going incredibly long, so I apologize for keeping you so late. But I could go on / listen to how the bread is made for this all day with it. Very very printing nerdy question, but I have to ask this. Where or at least if you guys able has the process for how you guys use or what you guys use for your printing services, has it kind of changed since LionWing has started / how involved with that process are you for it? Because I, for better or for worse, have had a lot of experience in my life with doing different jobs that involve large scale printing projects, and I always have such a morbid curiosity about how that whole industry works with print and books and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, in short, it's a nightmare.
It is.
I hate it. It's my least favorite part of the job. Everything is slow. Everything takes time. Manufacturers always get it wrong. You can give them the clearest directions, and they'll still somehow.
You could just do it in front of them, and they'd still find a way to do it wrong.
They would. And the printing industry is so slow right now and so far backed up. And it's very frustrating as a publisher, and I've been on calls with all of these publishers, big and small, and everyone's kind of saying the same thing of we are bottlenecked by the printers right now. And there are a variety of reasons for why that's happening, but it's regardless of the reason, it's super frustrating. So it's been an interesting journey to be on the backside of LionWing when talking about what the printing process has been like over the years, because it certainly has changed. We've worked with a variety of printers, some that we've loved, some that not so much, but it's always even the folks that you've worked with and you kind of know what their output is going to be. Every project presents its own unique printing issues, and you can try to plan for every scenario, and it still won't be enough because something will happen in the manufacturing process that you could not account for. And that's pretty much how it's been. I don't think LionWing has had much of a different experience or trajectory with printing companies than really any other publisher out there. I will say that just printing in books is significantly easier, and there are significantly less hiccups than printing in board games when you've got all of these really intricate pieces.
Oh my god.
You've got tons of pieces, and they're all cut a certain way, and they're all using
the colors, the materials,
it's
the weird defects.
It's a mess. It's horrible. Whereas when you're just printing books, it's pretty straightforward. Just give me that 80-pound uncoated paper, black and white, and I'm solid. It can sometimes be as easy as that. But even with books, things get messed up. But I'm certainly glad that I'm dealing in books these days than dealing in board games.
Oh God, yeah. I board games is the one I thankfully have ever had to be involved with the least, and it's only out of morbid fear because I know of how much. Speaking of things that involve too many cooks to even make anything happen in that kitchen, that is such a cluster cuss.
Yeah.
Last question, but kind of an interesting one I wanted to sort of throw back at you again for it. So, for anyone out there, if for God knows why you've listened to this the last 2.5 hours and went, I'm still kind of on the fence here for it before ordering, what would you say to anyone who's kind of on the fence about ordering this, as well as is there anything that we should kind of be worried about in terms of where stock levels are at, just for any of the FOMO people out there? Like, obviously, well, actually, I should not say obviously. Like, is reprints or like a second print run if this does sell out? Is that like a thing that's on the table, or is that something people should kind of have to worry about? Obviously, everyone should order 15 copies and keep all of them sealed, and make sure your loved ones also buy 15 copies. But for the realist people out there,
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. The book will be in plenty supply when it hits retailers, and you'll be able to find the book at any bookstore, big or small, from your local mom and pop shop to your Barnes and Nobles of the world. So it will be readily available. It will also be available on digital storefronts like the LionWing shop, of course, through places like Amazon, even Walmart will be carrying it. So if you're just going to wait until release to grab the book, I don't really think you'll have much to worry about. I do suspect that we will go through the first print run and we'll be doing a second printing sometime next year, but we will be doing a second printing. So there is no fear of running out of books to buy in the immediate future. So you're solid, you're covered. The only thing that you can consider is the LionWing edition of the book, which is limited in quantity. We don't have a number. It's not like we're printing 1,000 of these and when we've got 1,000 orders, that's it. The LionWing edition will be available for as long as the pre-order window is open through the LionWing shop. However, once that pre-order window closes on the LionWing shop, we will be no longer making those LionWing editions again. And I tend to stick to these types of things. So the LionWing edition of the book is just like a fancier version of the book. It doesn't come with necessarily additional content on the inside of the book. What it does come with is exclusive variant covers, which we've covered through this conversation. It comes with black painted page edges, which, if you read books and you're really into books, painted page edges and gilded page edges are really big right now. I really like the idea of painting the pages of this book black because I thought it made a lot of sense thematically. And when you pair those black painted pages with the red and black cover of the Death variant, you get a book that is nothing short of a visual masterpiece. So it's a beautiful book. But also, if you order from the LionWing shop, and certainly if you grab one of the LionWing edition copies of the book, you also get a free PDF of the book itself. So anytime you order one of our hardback books or really any of our books from our website, you get the PDF for free. Whereas if you grabbed it from, let's say, Amazon, you just get the book. You wouldn't get the PDF. You'd have to then, come to our web store and you'd have to buy the PDF for $30. So you effectively save $30 by ordering through our shop, and certainly by ordering the LionWing edition. On top of that, though, if you order from the LionWing shop and the LionWing edition, you also get a copy of the White Vortex mini campaign, which is a campaign for folks to play that leads players through a pretty awesome story. This scenario was exclusive to a magazine in Japan, and only 100 copies of that specific magazine were printed. So this thing is like not available anywhere, and you will get a PDF copy of that as well. But don't feel obligated to grab one from the LionWing shop because, like I said, you'll be able to find them at retailers. You'll just get the stock standard version, which is still a hardcover edition. It won't have painted page edges, and there'll only be one cover variant or one cover. But you'll be fine. You'll still have access to the book. But if you want to upgrade things and make your book look as pretty as possible, yeah, maybe head on over to lionwingpublishing.com and grab one of the LionWing editions.
hopefully it's not too inside baseball, and if it is, completely understandable. If you would have to take a guess, what usually is kind of the split for LionWing in terms of physical versus PDF sales that you guys see on your side?
Yeah, well, the numbers are skewed a little bit because whether you're backing a physical copy of one of our games through Kickstarter or you're grabbing a physical copy through our web store, you're always getting the PDF for free.
Mm-hmm.
So that skews the data a little bit. But if we just look at folks who order the physical copy, regardless of whether they get the PDF for free or not, and just the folks who order the PDF only, we're about at a 75-25 split. 75% of people are grabbing the physical edition of the book, and then 25% are grabbing the PDF only, and they're not bothering with the physical edition.
Okay, no, that's definitely interesting. Yeah, because I figured, especially for something like this, and I mean, print has also been so interesting of how it's kind of moved from a couple of years ago was way heavier digital versus now. I feel like we're in such a big resurgence. Like, I still do a double take when I go to like my local Target and Walmart, and the fact that there's now a manga section in all of those stores now is just like, what timeline am I in? Like, we can't stock physical games in Target anymore, but you know what, honey? Damn it, we're gonna buy Chainsaw Man here.
I'll tell you what, though, so it is surprising as a consumer, and you walk into Target, you see manga, you're like, what? But when you get access to the data and you see that manga is the top selling genre,
it's insane. Because yeah, like when you look at because I think New York Times still does their like weekly best-selling books and stuff, and manga like always dominates that list.
So like January of last year, January 2023, it came out that the year prior, 2022, manga was the genre that sold more than all other book genres combined. Not separately, combined. Now, that's an insane number. Manga is beginning to, as a genre, is just now beginning to cool off a little bit and sort of plateau, and in some areas even start trending down. But it's still incredibly popular. So it is kind of wild to walk into Target and see that kind of thing. Yeah. So what's also wild is you'll be able to walk into Barnes & Noble and you'll be able to buy a Shin Megami TTRPG right off the shelf if you want to. You know,
I will undoubtedly be making a very embarrassing picture at my local Barnes & Noble once a copy goes on shelves.
I hope you do.
I will. It's like my favorite thing to do is basically go to whatever, because I'm where I'm at. I'm like in between like 3 different Barnes & Nobles in my city, and I love to just like find whatever one I have that has it first and just grab a giant stack, because in my brain, if I don't buy a comically large amount of these to give away, who will, damn it? Which is then always funny, because then I would then think, oh, well, shouldn't I leave also a karmically large amount for other people to buy? And then they just get more and more and more of them, because that usually is what happens. Now, a like $10 book that Spencer is buying a lot of to give away is very different than a $50 version. I love you all enough to probably buy 2 versions to give away, but at the very least, there will be me trying to make a book thrown out of however many copies I can find of this.
We can probably hook you up with some copies to give away.
Okay, don't send me enough that like I'm gonna have a palette to then explain to my wife and be like, honey, what are we gonna do with this 900 copies of Tokyo Conception? I'll be like, this is our life now. Our life goal is to find people to give this book to.
Yeah, no, I'm not that nice, and I'm not giving away that much money to you. But I'll give you a couple copies for sure. I'll eat that cost.
I appreciate it, and I mean also I appreciate you talking with me. I jokingly thought we've been doing this for 2.5 hours. We basically have turned this into the 3-hour long marathon podcast. So I apologize for how dramatically long this went, and B, appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, no, we're definitely closer to 3 than we are 2. So no, I appreciate this as well. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on, and like I said before we started recording, the patience to work with my schedule here. I love talking about Shin Megami. I love the questions you asked, and I hope people are looking forward to the game.
Yeah, I mean, like I had said before with it, I am genuinely more excited to watch other people get this in their hands than anything. Just because, like, I think of even, like, just dumb things of, like, I've thrown this by a couple of the, like, voice actors from Nocturne. I'm like, guys, we have to get like a like even if it's not a full game, like we have to like get like can you just like imagine like oh hey it's like we'll have like the voice of like Demi Fiend and Hikawa and like a bunch of the other people like from Nocturne actually playing this thing would be insane.
You know, what's funny is I actually reached out to Hikawa's voice actor. Oh my gosh, now I'm blanking on it.
Connor.
Yeah. And I was kind of testing the waters to see if he would be willing to do some voiceover work for the trailer. That would ultimately end up just being kind of a text-based trailer. And he responded back. He was totally into it. And I went to Atlas and was like, "Hey, here's what I want to do." And they're like, "Yep, nope, we're not going to allow that." I was like, "Oh, okay, well,
No.
there goes that idea." I guess they're just
You
going to
were
do text.
so close to getting him off of Fortnite. He was so close to getting something that was productive in his life, but unfortunately, the adventures of Jim Hikawa have been cut short. Now, to be fair, that trailer is the one that you guys put out, right? Like the minute 20-second long
Yep.
trailer. Now, Atlas can tell you no. I mean, I could be randomly bored one night playing Fortnite with Connor Fogarty and just say, "Hey, look at this crazy trailer I've got on mute. Could you read this trailer off to me in just any random voice that sounds good to you?" And then if that recording comes out into the internet, I mean, who knows what'll happen at that
That's
point?
just a fan made dub. Nothing you can do about that.
That's true. You can't stop the fan-made
That's
dubs.
right.
Just don't tell Toei that. They're really good at that. Don't tell them that, please.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, Bradley, thank you again so much for coming on. I'll have links in either the YouTube or Spotify and iTunes version of this for everyone to not only check it out, but also see the website, the videos, all the different versions for everything. Where do you want either people to find you online and/or LionWing stuff?
Yeah, so you can check out the game at linewingpublishing.com. And then you can also catch us on social. It's just at LWing Publishing across the board. And you can also check out our Discord. It's a pretty rowdy place, pretty awesome people there, and you can find that by going to the link to our Discord at the top of our website. Hey, and feel free to throw us a subscribe on YouTube and our newsletter.
I was very pleasantly surprised to see that the most viewed video in your guys' YouTube is the gameplay for Tokyo Conception.
Yeah, that I was really surprised by that actually. I mean, I knew it was going to do some views, but I wasn't expecting that number. So, very cool.
And just on the off chance, are you guys planning on going to either any events later this year or anything where you guys either might be showing stuff off or not sure yet for any events coming up?
So 2025 is and there's a running joke in the Line Wing community that I always say that we're going to start conventions the year after the year that we're currently in. But I actually mean it this time, just because the business has shifted.
I got a good feeling about this one.
Yep. So we're looking at 2025 for being our first real convention run, and we'll be releasing what that schedule looks like as we get closer to the end of the year. But it'll be primarily anime conventions, to be honest, and then
Oh, okay.
a couple board game conventions. Some of the big hitters will be in there as well, along with PAX and whatnot.
I did not realize until I started. I'd been in like the card game and tabletop game community for a while, but I worked at a shop momentarily last year for a couple of months. And when they were kind of talking about the convention circuits they go to, I had no idea how many just strict board game conventions there were out there. It is daunting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a ton. Um, there's a ton. But most don't. They don't really make an impact, but the ones that do are fantastic and they're huge. I don't know if you've ever been to Gen Con, but that is a
Gen Con is the one I knew about for years, but had never really looked into it.
yeah.
And I'll probably not be able to go this year, but next year, good as always next year. My goal is to go for sure to. I know Anime Expo again next year is the plan. There wasn't really anything calling us back to, and in all honesty, I'm still paying off last year's Anime Expo. So once that one's paid off, next year I think would be like lining up with a lot more other stuff with it. And Gen Con is up there of another one of like it's a big convention I've always wanted to go to, but then after seeing people really going there and then like it's just such a different scale. Because, like, I've been to a lot of, like, smaller, like, board game conventions for it, but, like, something on that scale with that many different companies and that many different, like, people just coming there with, like, games just to test out, even if they don't end up coming out, would be just a cool thing to go to, even if it's just 1 year.
You know, I think folks who even have a tertiary interest in tabletop games need to check out Gen Con. It is a spectacle. It's unlike anything else that's out there. And there's a reason why it's kind of the Super Bowl of tabletop game conventions in the West. So it's a very cool environment. Lots of excitement, lots of people, lots of games to demo, lots of games to, break the bank on.
Oh my God, I know. God, so much money spent on cardboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Bradley, thank you again for coming on, and for everyone listening, like I said, all the notes for everything, where to find us, all that fun jazz. Always special big shout out to all of the patrons who help keep the show ticking. So big shout out to all the patrons, whether it be at the dollar level, listening early, like this one. You guys will be getting this show just a little bit under 2 weeks ahead of time, so enjoy that. Along with also the $5 and up executive producers who are always super, super appreciated, who I will one day be good at pulling up on a timely manner and not make it incredibly obvious that I'm going through my filters right now to find such beautiful producers such as Michael Wilson, Bell Chill, Cosmic Gloomy, Budweiser Tall Cans, Carlos Hernandez, Cross Renren, Winnie, Jagingas, Goro Cero, Cell Layer, Mirth Mouser, Stephen Yip, Patrick Dissert, and I'm sure there's somebody else I forgot, but I don't want to steal up any more time. And I'm also like beyond dead tired at this point. Although I say that my night will just be spent editing this and playing Final Fantasy VII because that's the life I've chosen for myself.
There are worse lives.
But that's true. Boy, you can say that. We could be people who have to be messing up prints of beautiful books at factories for a living all day. I don't want that life. But everyone listening, thank you again so much. Bradley, thank you again. Everyone over at LionWing. I'm imagining it's a 900-person team over there who helped make this happen.
1,000.
Exactly. It's an army. It's a small nation's army at LionWing, helping pump those books out by hand. Everyone involved, thank you all so much. We will see you next week. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye, everybody.